Zoe Gabrielle Campos was born in September 1995 in Lubbock, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of her parents, Melinda and Alejandro Campos III. She had an older sister, Savannah. Their father served in the Navy infantry, which caused the family to move frequently, but after a few years, they eventually returned to Lubbock. Melinda and Alejandro eventually divorced. While growing up, Zoe had many different hobbies, but most of all, she loved animals. Zoe's mother said that the girl often brought home stray animals. She has a kind heart, wants to help all animals, especially dogs, cats, and turtles. Zoe was very close to her mother from a young age. Her mother mentioned that people often joked about how Zoe and she had forgotten to cut the umbilical cord. Zoe was an incredible daughter, sister, and friend. She was cheerful, funny, but very caring. Zoe was also interested in mechanics and spent her free time repairing cars. Shortly before her disappearance, she started working on an old car that she hoped to restore herself. Her mother said that if Zoe could open a pet store next to an auto repair shop, she would definitely do it. Zoe had a wonderful relationship with her sister Savannah, and they spent a lot of time together. Savannah had 2 children, and Zoe loved being an aunt. She enjoyed taking her nephew fishing at a lake not far from their home. Despite being only 18 years old, Zoe was very mature and extremely responsible. She didn't go out partying, preferred the silence and cozy atmosphere at home. Unfortunately, all of this was taken away from her. On November 17, 2013, Zoe spent most of the day with her family. Later that evening, she planned to go to her friend April's house, where a baby had just been born, and April invited her closest friends to celebrate the occasion. It was not a big party, but rather a small gathering of friends, and of course, everyone there knew April. However, not all the guests knew each other. It was a normal evening. Everyone was chatting, and a friend mentioned that Zoe left around 9 p.m. because she planned to go to dinner with her sister Savannah. They intended to spend the evening with another friend. Savannah later reported that during dinner, Zoe was as carefree as ever. After dinner, everyone went to watch a movie. When the sisters returned home, Zoe planned to spend the night at Savannah's house to take care of her nephew and niece the next day while Savannah was at work. Savannah stated that the movie ended at 11:30 p.m., and during the film, Zoe seemed to fall asleep. When they got home, Savannah went to her room, thinking that Zoe would sleep on a couch in the living room, unaware that the next morning, her sister would be gone. Zoe left the house later that night when Savannah went to bed, which was out of character for her. It is known that Zoe left home at night from an emergency message her mother received at 2:30 a.m. Melinda worked at a bar that closed around that time, and she was pleasantly surprised when she got a message from her daughter, asking for a ride home. Melinda waited for about 30 minutes, but Zoe never showed up. Initially, Melinda was not too troubled and tried to call her daughter, but Zoe didn't answer. Melinda thought that maybe Zoe had simply fallen asleep. Melinda reached a friend's house near the bar and stayed there overnight, planning to return home in the morning. On November 18th, Zoe's sister woke up and began getting ready for work. Seeing that Zoe was not on the couch and not in the house, Savannah immediately started calling her. When Zoe didn't answer and her car wasn't parked outside, Savannah thought Zoe might have gone home early. She called again, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Savannah then contacted her mother and realized that she also couldn't reach Zoe. Panic ensued. Savannah and Melinda started calling hospitals to see if perhaps Zoe had been in an accident. However, after several hours without contact or any information, the women finally reported Zoe's disappearance to the police at around 5 p.m. The police could only accept a missing persons report after 24 hours. Fortunately, they agreed to send out a profile of Zoe's car and attempted to contact her mobile service provider. They were informed that Zoe's phone was either turned off or the battery had been removed. Then, a surprising coincidence occurred. Zoe's aunt, Monica Rivas, was driving through the city on November 20th when she spotted her niece's gray Lincoln car near the university on 62nd Street. Monica immediately followed the car, trying to see the driver, but found it difficult due to the tinted windows and the car's speed. Still, She managed to determine that the driver was a man dressed in a hoodie with a darker complexion, and he appeared to be about 20 years old. As Monica followed the car, a lot of questions raced through her mind. Was Zoe in the car? Had this person harmed her? These thoughts nearly overwhelmed her, so she decided to focus on following the car while calling her son to explain the situation. However, the driver of the pursued car seemed to realize he was being followed and tried to escape. Eventually, Monica lost sight of the car when it turned sharply south, but she persisted in her search. When her son joined her, they found the Lincoln parked near Zoe's apartment. Monica immediately called the police and had to wait about an hour for the officers to arrive. Unfortunately, Zoe was not in the car, and she remained listed as missing. After inspecting the car, the police discovered several items: a phone charger, a black jacket, a sweatshirt, and some duct tape. They collected all of these items as evidence and lifted fingerprints from the vehicle. Since Zoe's father was an active member of the Marine Corps, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service became involved in assisting with the investigation. They took the jacket for forensic examination to look for any traces that could lead them to Zoe. The investigators also needed to find out if anyone had seen her on November 17 from 11:30 p.m. onward. Based on her latest text messages, mobile phone operators helped to estimate her approximate location, which indicated that she had been within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field, a local football field. This area had a reputation for crime and other societal issues, which surprised Zoe's friends and family. Zoe did not use illegal substances and had no involvement in what is known as human trafficking, raising their concerns about the location where she was last seen. The investigators tried to speak with everyone who had been at April's house the night Zoe went missing, hoping someone might have heard or seen something unusual regarding Zoe's behavior or conversations. They discovered that a man named Carlos Rodriguez attended the party. When questioned on November 25, Carlos claimed he did not know Zoe before they met at April's but mentioned they had conversed briefly. He stated that they left at almost the same time, but the investigators found something odd in his story. Something felt insincere. As a result, Carlos was called in for additional questioning on December 9. During this session, the investigators received significantly different information. Carlos admitted he had lied earlier, that he and Zoe communicated on Facebook after leaving April's. He said they had agreed to meet at his house that night to chat, but he continued to deny any involvement in Zoe's disappearance. He claimed she had come over, they intended to smoke marijuana, but when they had none, so Zoe left to find some and never returned. Carlos explained his initial deceit was due to not wanting to get in trouble over banned substance. However, he became the primary suspect in the case. Given that he had lied previously, investigators wondered if he was telling the complete truth this time. It turned out that his house was within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field. In 2014, Zoe's family hired their own investigator to pursue any leads they came across, and they received numerous messages from community members eager to assist in the investigation. The investigators insisted that Carlos knew more than he disclosed. Eventually, they obtained a search warrant and investigated his residence. The police dogs brought and found several traces of Zoe's scent in that house and in the alley. The police conducted thorough searches of the premises but found no additional evidence. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, the entire community aided in the search, spreading awareness by posting flyers featuring photos of Zoe in hopes that someone might remember her or provide clues. As the years passed, Zoe's family and loved ones clung to hope for her safe return. On November 16, 2016, relatives and community members held a candlelight vigil to honor Zoe, who had gone missing 3 years prior. Over the years, investigators continued to seek the truth from Carlos. He was repeatedly called in for questioning, yet each time, his account of meeting Zoe evolved. However, when investigators found DNA on Carlos's jacket, he had to admit that Zoe had been in his house and in his room for some time. That night, Carlos was interrogated at the Lubbock County Detention Center. During investigations into Carlos, it was revealed that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, who said Carlos had threatened her with violence on several occasions. At that point, investigators were sure there was more to his story, but they needed concrete evidence before they could request another warrant. Then, another inmate, who was serving time with Carlos, mentioned in a conversation about the search that was being conducted at Carlos's house that, "The police have searched, the body will not be found until the concrete is removed." This statement was later confirmed by an informant who, on July 31, 2018, contacted detectives to tell them that Carlos had confessed to him where he hid Zoe's body. The informant provided specific details from Carlos's words about where the body could be found, which was enough to obtain another search warrant. In November 2018, the same team of police officers, accompanied by service dogs, went to conduct a search in the backyard. The dogs alerted the police, and they began digging in that area. Eventually, they discovered a set of bones. The bones were sent for examination, but before determining whose they were, there was no certainty that they were human remains. Carlos was called in for questioning, and in the middle of the interrogation, when the bones were mentioned, he fell silent, refused to talk until he was granted access to a lawyer. The lab results came quickly, revealing that the bones were not Zoe's, but rather animal bones. Investigators decided not to inform Carlos of this, as his reaction when the bones were mentioned suggested that the investigation was close to solving Zoe's case. In the following days, Carlos was closely watched, as were those he communicated with. After monitoring some of his conversations, investigators realized that Carlos genuinely believed they had found Zoe's remains. On November 14, the police used ground-penetrating radar to identify additional areas to dig. However, before digging commenced, Carlos requested to speak with the lead detective. During this meeting, Carlos gave a full confession. He explained that on the night he and Zoe were together, they decided to use an illegal substance. After taking it, he went crazy, hit Zoe hard in the face, put her in a chokehold, and took her life. Carlos claimed that he buried Zoe that night in his backyard and later relocated her body to a deeper grave. Investigators took Carlos to the residence where he showed them the location of Zoe's remains. Just after 10 p.m. on November 16, 2018, Zoe's decomposed remains were found. Carlos was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest warrant stated that Carlos Rodriguez confessed to killing Zoe in the house in which he committed the crime early in the morning of November 18, 2013. Zoe's remains were sent for forensic examination. Since much time had passed and the body had decomposed, they had to use dental records to confirm the identity of the remains. Zoe's father explained that when he sat down with relatives and told them that the body belonged to Zoe, everyone felt some relief, knowing that Zoe was not lost or suffering, and while this part of the tragedy was over, the pain remained. Despite Carlos's full admission of guilt, he later maintained in court that he was innocent. He also published a letter intended for the media in which he reiterated his claim of innocence, stating that he and Zoe had met at April's house for the first time and that they had shared some flirtation. Carlos claimed that when he sent Zoe a message on Facebook late at night, they agreed to talk at his house. He stated that during the conversation, his mind, clouded by the substance, distorted reality, leading him to perceive Zoe as having an evil grin before he struck her. He said he did not remember how he managed to catch up to her, and that he regretted the actions he took, having lived for 5 years with guilt over the murder. Carlos apologized to Zoe's family in his letter, asking them to forgive him and encouraging them not to succumb to hatred. He also claimed he had to bury Zoe's body after it began to be unearthed by dogs. He and his lawyers prepared for trial, arguing that his original confession had been coerced because he had not been represented by a lawyer at the time. However, the judge ruled that both Carlos's oral and written confessions were legally obtained, could be used in court. On August 15, 2022, Carlos changed his plea from not guilty to an open plea, meaning he did not make a deal with prosecutors but planned to use his chances in court. He faced a minimum sentence of 5 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. After a brief deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on August 18, sentencing Carlos Rodriguez to life imprisonment for the murder of Zoe Campos. In the Italian province of Bergamo, the municipality of Cologno al Sirios has around 10,000 residents. Femicides are a significant concern here, with many women being harmed by their former or current partners. In 2019, Zinaida Solinari, a 36-year-old woman originally from a small village in Moldova, was living in Cologno al Sirios. She had resided in Italy for nearly 15 years and had made some progress toward achieving her dreams. Like many young women who leave their home countries in search of a better life, Zinaida aimed to establish herself abroad. She arrived in Italy in 2004 at the age of 21, hoping to find employment and eventually a husband to create a happy life. Right after moving to Bergamo, Zinaida began her new life and work. She was a vibrant and attractive young woman who received a lot of attention from men, but she was not looking for a short-term fling. She wanted to find a husband. A few years later, she met a man named Maurizio Quattrochi, who was 11 years older than her. He appeared trustworthy and kind. She was immediately drawn to him. It's important to mention that Zinaida lived with her daughter, whom she had at the age of 16. At the time of their move, her daughter was 5 years old. Maurizio welcomed her daughter as if she were his own and later adopted her. Zinaida hadn't yet made many friends in Bergamo. From the start, Maurizio treated her and her daughter beautifully, offering a sense of security that won Zinaida over. They began a relationship that quickly became serious. Maurizio was a painter and bricklayer with a troubled past that included several criminal offenses, which he chose not to share with Zinaida, a fact she later discovered. He had been convicted multiple times for buying stolen property and had several instances of driving under the influence. Despite this history, he treated Zinaida and her daughter with great care. In late 2004, they married. The following year they welcomed their first daughter, with a second daughter arriving 4 years later. Maurizio was dedicated to his family, but he had a fiery temperament. Zinaida affectionately called him a hot Italian, believing it to be part of his charm. She worked to smooth over any tensions. For many years, their relationship appeared loving and understanding. However, beneath the surface, there were troubling issues. Zinaida's family soon learned about Mauricio's bad temper. He was impulsive and aggressive. His jealousy began to strain their relationship, particularly after Zinaida took a job as a waitress at a popular restaurant in mid-2019. Maurizio was unhappy with her job because many men frequented the restaurant, and his financial struggles heightened his jealousy. Especially as Zinaida's salary allowed her more independence, made her the family's primary earner. At the restaurant, Zinaida met a woman who was also from Eastern Europe. They discovered they had a lot in common. Her colleagues soon noticed the tension between Zinaida and her husband, Maurizio. During Zinaida's first week at her new job, Maurizio came to the restaurant because she hadn't answered his calls. He raised his voice at her, and her colleague could see that Zinaida flinched at every loud sound, revealing her fear of her husband. After that incident, Zinaida shared with her colleague that Maurizio was jealous, upset because she had become more independent and had slipped out of his control. Despite this, Zinaida was determined to stand her ground, not give in to his demands, so she continued working at the restaurant, hoping that her husband would eventually adjust and stop pressuring her. The situation was worsening, seemed to be getting out of control. Her colleague noticed that after several months of working at the restaurant, Zinaida had lost a significant amount of weight and appeared very anxious, which was quite concerning. Zinaida usually dealt with her problems on her own, seldom talked about her life. However, it was clear that her marriage was failing. After 13 years, Zinaida realized it was time for a change. She understood how dangerous her husband was after a fight that occurred just before the tragedy. Unfortunately, she didn't have time to respond. Around 2 a.m. on October 6, 2019, the city police received a report about a woman who had been injured. When officers arrived at Via Alberto de Giussano, it was too late to help her. She had already died. The woman was 36-year-old Zinaida Solinari. Police quickly interviewed her family and friends. Zinaida was found in the courtyard of her sister Oksana Solinari's house, where she had been living recently. Oksana had moved to Italy after Zinaida, and her life had been more settled since marrying Lucio Carlo Di Dio. Oksana informed the police about the difficulties Zinaida faced in her marriage. She believed the event was a result of Mauricio's ongoing aggressive behavior. Just before the tragedy, Zinaida had made the decision to leave her husband, believing it was her only option after a recent family conflict. In private, Zinaida confided in Oksana that Mauricio had threatened her, saying if she tried to leave, he would kill her and then take his own life. From that point, Zinaida understood that the man she thought was her protector could actually be a serious threat to her safety. She shared her experiences of aggression, physical abuse, and how she had to call the police after her last fight with Mauricio. At that time, Zinaida had 3 children, but her husband was indifferent and consumed by jealousy. He was behaving violently, and it was only when the police arrived that he calmed down. Although Zinaida chose not to file formal charges against him, she spoke to the police out of fear for her safety. She thought that moving out of the house was the best way to protect herself and her children. After leaving, she hoped Mauricio would eventually calm down so they could officially get divorced. However, Zinaida did not recognize that the period when a woman tries to escape the control of an abusive partner is often the most dangerous time, both during the decision to separate and the act of leaving. Zinaida opened up to several friends about her husband's frequent episodes of intense jealousy. She shared that he not only yelled at her but also physically assaulted her. However, when speaking with detectives, she did not mention the threats of violence. She minimized the severity of her situation, claiming that her husband had never physically harmed her until mid-2019, despite his aggressive demeanor and constant emotional pressure. Zinaida believed she could manage her circumstances alone. Just 2 hours before she was murdered, a patrol of carabinieri drove by her sister's house. Oksana was aware that Mauricio was searching for his wife. He had come to visit her that evening and hadn't been seen since. Concerned for safety, Oksana called the police. The carabinieri checked the area but left without finding anything suspicious. Later that evening, Oksana's husband mentioned seeing a car that looked like Mauricio's parked in a dead end, but they could not locate its owner. If the police officers had been more vigilant, they might have noticed something amiss and potentially prevent the crime. Mauricio Quattrochi was 47 years old, had a history of a bad temper. Recently, he lost his job as a bricklayer, a position he had held for several years. This wasn't the first instance of him being fired. He was previously let go from his job as a cook at a pizzeria due to conflicts with management. Although Mauricio had always been aggressive, Zinaida usually managed to calm him down. However, after losing his job, his anger intensified. He struggled with the pressure of not being able to support his family, which only added to his irritation, especially towards Zinaida's accomplishments. On the evening of October 5th, he was waiting for Zinaida to return home while intoxicated. Just days earlier, Zinaida and her children had moved in with her sister, Oksana, seeking refuge without revealing her plans. She felt there were no other options for support and thought that staying with her sister would allow the children to continue going to their previous school. Zinaida also underestimated the likelihood of Mauricio acting on his threats. She wanted to avoid causing additional stress for their children. The next day after Zinaida moved out, Mauricio quickly found her at his relative's house. They had another uncomfortable conversation, but this time Zinaida chose not to involve the police. She wanted to prevent anyone else from getting hurt and still hoped that Mauricio, with whom she had spent 13 years, would act rationally. Sadly, he had started to see her as an object, making rationality unlikely. Tragically, Zinaida was found outside her sister's house with several stab wounds, some of which were life-threatening. The attacker had cut her throat and stabbed her in the chest, leading to severe blood loss. She died before the ambulance could reach her. At that moment, her 3 daughters were asleep just a few meters away from their mother. When the carabinieri arrived, Mauricio was already gone, having fled the scene of the crime. However, Zinaida's sister had important information about him. Oksana, who was close to her sister, knew details about Mauricio's job, his favorite hangouts, and his car. Her husband, Lucio, noted that an old Peugeot 206 was parked in an alley and that car drove away in it right after the attack. Witnesses provided the police with the vehicle's license plate, allowing them to start the search for him immediately. The police first searched Mauricio's house but found no one there. They then checked his previous workplaces but found them empty as well. He had gone on the run, but there were only a few possible escape routes. The Carabinieri were pursuing the suspect and were closing in. However, they worried he might abandon his car and hide in the wilderness. The police monitored checkpoints and cameras along the potential escape paths. Maurizio was quickly located, and a large-scale operation was planned to capture him. They set up checkpoints on the road and stopped cars that matched his description. Despite this, Maurizio managed to briefly slip through the barrier. His escape lasted just under 16 hours. Eventually, a man matching his description was seen walking along the road, several hundred kilometers from the murder scene. Surprisingly, he hadn't traveled far from Oksana's house, as if he was unsure of what to do and was aimlessly wandering while trying to come up with a plan. He was stopped and arrested at the city entrance. The alleged criminal was taken to Treviglio station, charged with first-degree murder, and sent to prison in Bergamo. At this point, Maurizio claimed that Zenaida's death was accidental, insisting he never wanted to hurt his beloved wife. However, her sister, Oksana, reminded him of his earlier threats to kill Zenaida. Oksana was aware that Maurizio had long suspected Zenaida of cheating, frequently accusing her of having affairs with other men, even though there was no truth to those claims. She firmly believed that Zenaida had remained faithful in their marriage, but Maurizio was not convinced. The situation may have worsened due to Mauricio's job loss and Zenaida's newfound independence. She recognized that their family was struggling and that they needed money for basic necessities. Taking a job at a restaurant was her way of supporting herself, her husband, and their children. Unbeknownst to her, this decision stirred intense anger in Maurizio. Rather than being encouraging, he grew increasingly jealous and resentful. His behavior could have been exacerbated by the depression often linked to such issues, but this did not lessen his guilt. Mauricio's behavior was similar to stalking. Maurizio bombarded Zenaida with constant work calls, which severely affected her ability to perform her job. He insisted on constant contact, even asked for photos to prove where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. Her employer noticed her frequent distractions and advised her to turn off her mobile phone, hoping this would alleviate the situation with her husband. Unfortunately, this only made things worse. Rather than stop his interference, Maurizio started arriving at the restaurant and causing dramatic scenes. Each time, his behavior became more concerning. All these incidents were verified by a friend of Zenaida, whom she met at the restaurant. Although Zenaida preferred not to complain, she shared with her sister that she was overwhelmed by ongoing scandals at home. After long days at work, she would return to face constant accusations of infidelity and jealousy-driven arguments. Trying to defend herself felt pointless. By the end of summer 2019, she experienced physical violence at home for the first time. Instead of addressing their problems and looking for a job, Maurizio turned to drinking, which led to conflicts, left her with bruises. After interviewing the suspect, detectives determined that jealousy was the motive behind this act of femicide. They investigated Mauricio's background to confirm the statements made by Zenaida's relatives and friends. He seemed to be a typical manipulator who was losing control over Zenaida. After losing his last job due to a conflict with his boss, he could only find odd jobs that didn't provide enough income to support the family. This situation led him to alcoholism and increasingly abusive behavior. In contrast, Zenaida was working as a waitress and occasionally as a hotel maid. She also earned extra income through modeling. It became clear that she no longer needed this relationship. From what was known, Maurizio spoke negatively about Zenaida's modeling career, convinced that it was linked to other men, leading him to believe that she was unfaithful. Although he could not find any evidence to support this, he was equally unable to convince his spouse otherwise. After the Carabinieri were first called due to a domestic dispute involving threats, they assessed Mauricio's behavior and advised Zenaida to move out. It was generally accepted that her refusal to file a complaint contributed to her death. Maurizio continued to assert that his attack was unintentional, claiming he simply wanted to talk to his wife and that she was the one who first exhibited aggression. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation contradicted these assertions. Zinaida had remained calm, diffusing all hostility, and consistently tried to avoid conflict. In contrast, everyone who knew Maurizio well described him as extraordinarily aggressive, hot-tempered, and controlling. The fact that the Carabinieri could not find him during their patrol confirmed suspicions that he had set up an ambush and was in hiding. He possessed a kitchen knife, which became the weapon used in the murder. It could not have ended up in his hands by chance. He had taken it with him intentionally, having planned to confront Zinaida from the very beginning. According to the reconstruction of events, late on Saturday evening, Zinaida was returning home from a night shift at the restaurant. The last message she received from her loved ones was a warning. Around midnight, Oksana wished her sister a safe journey and advised her to be careful. When speaking to the police, Oksana expressed that she had a bad feeling, which is why she wrote this message to Zinaida. She had no idea that the future killer was already waiting for his victim outside the house. Zinaida barely managed to stop near the gate of Oksana's house and got out of her car. She had walked only 3 meters when Maurizio attacked her with a kitchen knife, striking her several times with force. However, Zinaida did not lose consciousness. Instead, she began to scream. This noise awakened her neighbors and her sister, who called for help. Unfortunately, the criminal had enough time to inflict a fatal wound on his victim. Even after the neighbors raised a ruckus, he continued the attack, unable to control the anger fueled by jealousy. Realizing what had happened, Maurizio jumped into his car and began to flee. However, this reckless escape was ill-conceived, as there was nowhere for him to hide. The day of Zinaida Solinari's funeral was declared the day of mourning in the city. This tragic news shocked not only the numerous members of the city's Moldovan community but also all other residents. Flags were lowered, and many local establishments were closed. A memorial service was held, attended by an Orthodox priest from Bergamo. Hundreds of concerned citizens came to the church for the vigil, all appalled by the tragic fate of this kind and beautiful woman. White flowers lay on the white coffin, and red ribbons, a symbol of the fight against femicide, were tied at the feet of local residents. Red roses were placed around a fountain in the main square, and candles were lit. Meanwhile, the suspect remained defiant. His story changed several times, resulting in no one believing him anymore. During another interrogation, Maurizio claimed that the meeting was simply to communicate with his wife. After consuming a considerable amount of alcohol, he insisted that he felt a surge of jealousy, which had become increasingly frequent. Throughout the day, he had contacted his wife. Even if Maurizio genuinely wanted to know what his wife was doing that evening, the response did not satisfy him. He attacked her while checking her mobile phone. The Carabinieri discovered that earlier that evening, at about 6 p.m., Oksana had informed her that Maurizio had come to her house looking to see his children. Naturally, Zinaida refused, as she immediately noticed that he was drunk. She told him he could only see his daughters the next day when he had sobered up. This likely intensified Mauricio's jealousy, suggesting that he may have been lying in wait near the house for several hours before attacking his victim. Initially, Maurizio insisted that it was all an accident, then claimed he did not remember anything. His final explanation was that he did not want to kill Zinaida but was unable to control himself due to jealousy. His lies did not clarify whether he had truly been waiting there all that time with a knife or if he had left and returned after the Carabinieri had checked the area. Maurizio maintained that he could not recall anything because of the alcohol he had consumed and even denied bringing a knife with him, claiming he could have found it near his sister Zinaida's house. During interrogations, he also stated that his wife loved him, that she did not deserve such an end, that he believed until the very end that they could be together again and everything would work out. Oksana and Lucio countered this claim, stating that it was a lie. Zinaida had fled because she was afraid of him, felt under constant pressure and control. At the hearing, one of the first to speak was her sister, 32-year-old Oksana. She recounted how she heard a muffled cry for help in her sleep. Instinctively, she felt it was Zinaida. Upon opening her eyes, she heard it again and realized she was right. She immediately woke her husband, and together they rushed into the street, where they saw Maurizio. The attack was ongoing. He was holding Zenaida by the throat, striking her repeatedly. The prosecutor's office rightly labeled this act an extreme form of cruelty, as the criminal was completely out of control. Even in front of witnesses, the assault continued. This brutal act left 3 children without a mother and father. Oksana's words were substantiated by her husband, Lucio, his brother, Alessandro, and her neighbor, Riccardo Pacini. They all witnessed the moment of the attack but did not have time to intervene. Everything happened too quickly. When they approached, Maurizio fled. Zenaida's 18-year-old daughter, Vitalia, also participated in the trial. Mauricio's 2 youngest daughters, aged 9 and 13, were not present in the courtroom. They did not want to interact with their father, who had left them orphaned. The girls were placed in Oksana's care. During the hearing, a forensic expert testified that he found 18 wounds on Zenaida's body. 3 of these wounds were inflicted on her face and were identified as defensive injuries on the victim's arms. Another 8 wounds were located on her neck, indicating that this was likely the target area of the killer, as his actions did not correspond with typical unintentional murder. One of the most dangerous blows punctured the aorta at the base of her neck, resulting in severe bleeding. Just a few minutes later, Zenaida lost consciousness and subsequently died. Her relatives held her in their arms during her final moments as she faded before their eyes, bleeding to death until the rescue service arrived. Her last words were, "I can't breathe anymore." Only after hearing her last words did he decide to flee. At that moment, a kitchen knife fell to the ground, which was later found by the police. The prosecution insisted that the attack was premeditated, as the knife found matched one from Mauricio's kitchen set, which was missing from his home. The lawyer tried to justify the defendant in an implausible manner, claiming that he had found a blade near his sister Zenaida's house. Despite this, Mauricio's lawyer continued to advocate for a mitigated sentence and insisted on a psychiatric examination. According to the lawyer, there had been a systematic deterioration in Mauricio's mental state, which became apparent several days before the crime. On that day, Zenaida stated that he had become obsessive, possessive, and much more aggressive than usual. Just before the incident, Zenaida told her sister that her husband had tried to strangle her with a belt from a robe. When Oksana's husband came to help with a move, he noticed that Zenaida's internet cables had been cut, which seemed strange. Furthermore, Mauricio took her mobile phone, indicating that the situation was spiraling out of control. The lawyer believed these were signs of mental problems. However, the relatives of Zenaida did not want to allow the killer to receive a lenient sentence due to claims of insanity. Oksana claimed that her sister had considered breaking up 8 years before the tragedy. Oksana said Zenaida felt like a victim and was afraid that her husband could be dangerous, but she stayed in the relationship for the sake of their children. Zenaida's relatives said she described a miserable 10-year marriage. Mauricio ended his own life, as he had promised, while in custody during the trial. His lawyer commented on his client's death. The hearing shocked Mauricio. He could not bear the shame and disgrace, especially since some aspects, according to him, did not correspond to reality. He was particularly taken aback by witness testimonies that described 10 years of torment, during which his wife had suffered and was denied a divorce. Mauricio expressed regret for his actions but realized he could not turn back time to alter the circumstances of his wife's death. He feared that his daughters would be compelled to testify against him, which would have been an even greater blow. Consequently, Mauricio decided to end his life. He left several suicide notes for his family, but their contents remain unknown. The brutal murder of Zenaida Solinari on October 6, 2019, in Cologno al Sirios marked a devastating loss for her family and the community. Fleeing an abusive marriage, Zenaida sought refuge with her sister Oksana days earlier, hoping to protect her 3 daughters. Her courage to reclaim her independence triggered Maurizio Quattroci's jealousy, culminating in a premeditated attack that ended her life. The court's focus on the crime's brutality underscored the gravity of femicide, a persistent issue in Bergamo, where women like Zenaida faced danger from intimate partners. Zenaida's story is a stark reminder of the urgent need for stronger protections and awareness to prevent such tragedies, ensuring no woman pays the ultimate price for seeking freedom. Many children enjoy attending summer camps, going on trips, or even traveling abroad. These experiences allow them to discover new places and broaden their understanding of the world. However, sometimes these adventures can take a dark turn, leading to serious situations. During the summer, Brittany in France is a beautiful destination and generally considered safe, attracting thousands of schoolchildren from various countries each year. The same was true in 1996. In mid-July, a group of students from Cornwall, England, arrived in France, including a girl named Caroline Dickinson. She was one of 40 children on the trip, accompanied by 5 teachers. At 13 years old, Caroline was an average student. This was her first trip to another European country. She was excited but felt a bit down about going without her friend, and her mother had asked the teacher to look out for her. Nevertheless, Caroline quickly connected with the other children and traveled with the group to a small village named Plain Fougars of Brittany. The trip organizers had arranged for the students' accommodation at a youth hostel. Plain Fougars had only a few shops and bars, with a population of just over 3,000 people. This small, quaint village excited Caroline, as it was her first time visiting such a cozy place. After moving into the hostel for foreign guests on July 18, 1996, Caroline enjoyed making new friends and quickly became close to a girl named Camilla. Unfortunately, they were assigned to different rooms. Camilla's room had 2 bunk beds, both of which were already occupied. Not wanting to go back to her own room, Caroline decided to bring her mattress into Camilla's room. She placed it on the floor between the 2 large beds and chose to spend the night there. Before going to sleep, Camilla and Caroline talked for a long time. The last thing Camilla remembers is singing a song about the stars with Caroline before they both fell asleep. The next morning, when the girls in the room woke up, they found Caroline lying on the floor in an unnatural position, her eyes wide open. They called her name, but she didn't respond. She was already cold. A scream of horror filled the room, drawing the attention of the teachers, who rushed in and were stunned by the sight. They immediately contacted the police. When the gendarmes arrived, they concluded that it was a murder, and the girl had died under horrific circumstances. The entire community of Plain Fougars was left in shock by the tragedy. The event was so traumatic that many found it hard to discuss. Caroline had been abused, and she died from asphyxia caused by a lump of cotton wool lodged deep in her throat, which led to her suffocation. Caroline was known for her diligence. She worked hard and excelled academically. The incident shocked not only the families of the children but also the entire French village, which had never experienced anything like it. The crime had many strange aspects. Most notably, it was hard to understand how the criminal could sneak into a room full of 5 sleeping children and kill one without waking the others. How did he manage to enter the dormitory without being seen by teachers or security? Detectives soon figured out that an outsider could gain access to the building. Fire safety regulations at the time required that entrances and exits remain open, and some were left unmonitored. This meant that anyone could easily enter the building through these doors. After the girls who shared a room with Caroline recovered from the tragedy, the police were finally able to interview them. 2 witnesses reported seeing something unusual that night. One girl woke up in the middle of the night, heard quiet moans, and noticed Caroline's legs twitching. However, she thought her roommate was just having a nightmare and decided not to investigate further. Another girl also woke up around the same time and saw a shadow move across the room toward the exit. She assumed it was one of the other girls going to the bathroom. There were no screams or anything else alarming that would have drawn anyone's attention. A development built on witness testimonies that, on the night of July 18th, Caroline chose to sleep on the floor between her friends' bunk beds so she could be close to them. Around 4 a.m., an unknown man entered the dormitory through an unlocked door. He went upstairs and found Caroline asleep on the floor. He placed a large wad of cotton in her mouth, likely to silence her, then assaulted and abused her. After killing her, he left the scene. At that same time, one of the teachers was awakened by a suspicious noise and looked out the dormitory window. She saw a stranger riding away on a motorcycle but thought he was just passing by. After seeing the stranger, she checked the sleeping areas but didn't notice anything unusual, all the children appeared to be sleeping peacefully. She chose not to turn on the lights or wake anyone, believing there was no reason to do so, and returned to her bed. The murder investigation was carried out quietly, with minimal information released. This approach was in stark contrast to similar cases in England, where press conferences were held, and the public was actively engaged to help gather information. With no new information, it appeared that the case had hit a dead end. After all required examinations, the body of Caroline was returned to her parents in England. Many people attended her funeral, hoping the criminal would be caught soon. Unfortunately, in the months that followed, no suspects emerged. The investigation stalled, and even after a year, there was still no progress. Many criticized the French police for their poor handling of the case and lack of professionalism. Caroline's parents, John and Sue, and their daughter Jenny, had made the harrowing journey to France. They returned to the small village in Brittany on the anniversary of his daughter's death. He was frustrated by the detectives' lack of communication and their failure to engage the public in the investigation. He made a public appeal for help, urging the local community to remember the tragic events surrounding the death of his 13-year-old daughter. John called on residents to share any information they might have about the case, hoping to find the person responsible. Caroline's father were astonished to find out that no fingerprints had been collected from the crime scene. In the early stages of the investigation, officers simply went door to door to talk to local residents. However, the lead detective refused to collect DNA samples from all the men in the village, even though the number of men was small. This refusal seemed unreasonable, especially given the specific nature of the killer's actions. John believed that the perpetrator lived nearby, was familiar with the area, and could easily come and go without being noticed. As John examined the French police procedures more closely, their frustration grew. In the end, he decided to reach out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to request pressure on the French authorities for a more comprehensive investigation. Thanks to the campaign he initiated, his request was approved in August 1997, which led to significant media pressure on the gendarmes. This situation even resulted in the dismissal of the detectives who were responsible for the initial investigation in France. The new lead detective quickly concentrated on the early mistakes made in the case. They chose to reassess the limited evidence and review most of the information. However, with over a year having passed since the murder, this task proved to be quite challenging. Key witnesses were interviewed again, and based on their statements, a new composite sketch of the suspected killer was created. All information was made public promptly to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. The court also approved the victim's parents' request for DNA testing of all the men in the town where their daughter was killed. This was the first mass DNA testing conducted in the history of forensic science in Britain. Caroline's father had previously believed that the attacker was a local resident, but the testing ultimately revealed no matches. Investigators were compelled to adopt new strategies and consider events beyond the village. During this process, a new detective uncovered a troubling link to an incident in the nearby village of St. Lenaire. On the night Caroline Dickinson was murdered, an unknown man had entered a youth hostel in St. Lenaire where students were staying. The intruder entered a room where 4 teenagers were sleeping but was quickly spotted. Lights were turned on, causing chaos that forced him to flee. Following a failed abuse attempt in a field, the suspect had allegedly traveled 25 kilometers in search of a new victim. Unfortunately, this crucial lead was overlooked during the initial investigation, as no one was harmed in this incident, resulting in very few details about the man. Detectives focused on the 4 witnesses from the youth hostel who had seen the likely assailant clearly in the light. Once located and interviewed, their insights helped refine a composite sketch of the suspect. As details about the mysterious abuser circulated across France, authorities alerted all youth hostels and dormitories about the situation. They also collected information on similar crimes from comparable organizations. Although data was scarce, the number of potential suspects gradually increased. By the end of 1997, approximately 3,000 local men were identified as possible offenders. To definitively determine the killer's identity, all must undergo testing and DNA profiling. This extensive process took nearly 2 years, as investigators treated the case with utmost seriousness. After some time, investigators repeatedly encountered the name Francisco Arce Montes. He is a 47-year-old Spanish citizen with a long history of criminal activity across several European countries. His first arrest was in Germany during the 1980s, where he received a 5-year sentence for abuse. Following that, he carried out an attack in the Netherlands, resulting in a few months of imprisonment. In 1994, he was arrested in France for attempting to assault a girl at a youth hostel. His appearance matched the composite sketch created from witness descriptions. Upon examining his criminal history, detectives discovered at least 10 similar incidents across Europe, all involving the abuse of girls and teenagers in youth hostels. Unfortunately, tracking him down proved difficult since he was a migrant, continuously moving between countries and making it possible for him to be anywhere in Europe or beyond. By the end of the 1990s, Francisco had gained notoriety among law enforcement agencies throughout Europe. He emerged as the prime suspect among the various candidates. To focus solely on him and rule out the others, it was essential to apprehend Francisco and obtain a DNA sample from him. Meanwhile, testing continued, and gradually, the list of 3,000 suspects was narrowed down, eliminating individuals one by one. Francisco managed to evade capture so effectively that, at one point, even the victim's parents began to question if he would ever be found. In March, a group of Irish students went on vacation and stayed at a youth hostel near the beach. That evening, an unknown man entered one of their rooms, but 2 female students caught him. He insisted he had entered the wrong room by mistake and quickly left. Although the girls were worried about what had happened, they chose not to report the incident, assuming the man was simply confused because he was drunk. The next day, this man was seen in the same hostel. He was found in one of the rooms and acting suspiciously around 2 a.m. Shortly after, he left, claiming he had confused the rooms. 4 girls who witnessed this immediately called emergency services to report a break-in and an abuse. One of the girls stated that she had been abused while she slept. She provided her underwear for examination and consented to all necessary tests. The police caught the mysterious criminal after one of the Irish students recognized him the following day. The girl was in the room that was broken into yesterday and noticed the suspicious man walking around the pool as if nothing had happened. She immediately called 911, and he was arrested. He was taken to the Miami Beach Police Department for questioning. The man denied being involved in the suspicious activities at the youth hostel over the past few days. During his interview with law enforcement, he eventually provided his real name, Francisco Montes. He claimed to be a solo traveler who had spent considerable time in South America and European countries, including Germany and France, and was currently traveling around the United States. During his conversation with the detectives, he made several strange, claiming he hadn't committed any crime and that he had merely entered other people's rooms by accident while drunk. Francisco repeatedly asked, in anger, whether masturbation was illegal in the United States, suggesting that his actions weren't harmful. His behavior was both provocative and odd. He ultimately took a DNA test and was held for further investigation. By this time, Caroline's murder had gone cold, until Tommy Onko, an immigration officer at the Detroit airport, picked up a British newspaper and read a story about the 5th anniversary of the unsolved murder. The article named Montes as a possible suspect, and on a whim, Onko decided to look up immigration information to see if a man by that name had ever been to the United States. He found the name of Francisco Arce Montes, who was in fact in police custody in Miami Beach. Onko contacted French and British authorities and was able to confirm Francisco's date of birth and hometown. Meanwhile, Montes was arrested in Miami Beach for abusing an Irish tourist at a youth hostel. The crime was similar to the modus operandi in Caroline's case, with Montes being able to enter the girls' rooms without waking the victim or her roommate. Francisco was arrested by Sergeant, later Major, Angel Vasquez of the Miami Beach Police Department. Major Vasquez obtained a DNA sample from Montes, which matched the DNA from the male fluid at the Irish students' youth hostel. In addition, Major Vasquez linked Montes to 4 other similar incidents in Miami Beach. Combined with Onko's sources, investigators linked Francisco to Caroline's murder. Francisco's DNA was later matched to DNA from the Caroline Dickinson murder investigation. The state of Florida suspended charges against Francisco to allow for his extradition to France to face charges for Caroline's murder. Finally, there was a genuine possibility of solving Caroline's murder. The major obstacle was the distance. At any moment, Francisco could be released on bail and vanish, traveling anywhere in the world. They began communicating with detectives in France through the former consul. Their concerns were finally alleviated when they received confirmation of Francisco's name and date of birth, which matched the information held by French authorities. It was discovered that Francisco had traveled around Europe before coming to the United States, where he was working as a truck driver. In March 2001, Francisco was arrested in Florida and identified as the main suspect in the murder of Caroline Dickinson, which occurred in France 5 years earlier. At this point, the young women who had been attacked in Miami recognized Francisco as the intruder who had broken into their dorm rooms, enabling the authorities to detain him. DNA from bodily fluids found on Caroline's body was sent to France for testing to confirm a match. This was a critical moment for European investigators and Caroline's parents. A few days later, the test results revealed an almost 100% match. Francisco Montes was extradited from the United States to France after 6 months, and it took another 2 years for him to confess to his crimes. He admitted to abusing a 13-year-old girl in France but claimed that Caroline Dickinson's death was accidental. Francisco argued that he had a mental illness, which he believed made him unaccountable for his actions. However, his attempt to avoid punishment due to insanity was unsuccessful. Experts concluded he was sane and capable of standing trial following several assessments. During the trial, he rarely spoke, mostly in Spanish, and appeared calm, showing no remorse for his actions. He was required to testify, and Francisco explained in French how the murder occurred. He stated that the defendant had traveled from Rennes to Plain Fougers with plans to return to England, where he was residing at the time. After getting lost, he sought a place to stay for the night and found the only building in the small village with its lights on, a youth hostel. He entered at night and saw that everyone was asleep. He began to check the rooms and noticed Caroline sleeping on the floor, whom he viewed as an easy target. Francisco approached her, covered her mouth with his hand, and then assaulted her. He ended up abusing her and accidentally killed her with a piece of cotton wool that suffocated her. Panicked, he fled the scene. During the trial, Francisco asked the victim's parents for forgiveness, acknowledging, he knows the Dickinson family will never forgive him. The parents of Caroline, who were divorced at the time, along with their youngest daughter, attended the trial and provided testimony. They described their daughter as an innocent girl who wanted to explore the world and travel to different countries. This trip was a step towards fulfilling her dream. The parents had allowed Caroline to go on the trip without any concerns, believing that France was a safe place and that she would be supervised by her teachers. Caroline and her classmates were scheduled to visit various interesting sites. No one could have predicted the tragic outcome of this journey. Had they known, they would never have permitted their daughter to go. They did not forgive the criminal. During the trial, details about the defendant's life were uncovered. His mental health issues began in his teenage years when he started showing symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. He was fixated on cleanliness, using a handkerchief to open doors and turn on lights, avoiding touching anything with his bare hands, meticulously washing everything with mineral water and soap multiple times. At the age of 20, Francisco started experiencing difficulties. After his friends learned about this, they sent him to a psychiatrist, who diagnosed him with depression and progressive schizophrenia. In the mid-1970s, he left Spain and traveled across Europe. He lived a transient lifestyle, working as a waiter, hotel doorman, or driver, but primarily relied on money from his father. An acquaintance noted that Francisco was very familiar with all the youth hostels in Europe and often sought the company of girls, particularly those aged 11 to 12, considering anyone over 20 to be too old for him. His friend also recalled a chilling admission from Francisco, where he expressed that he saw nothing wrong with killing a person. At one point, he had a girlfriend whom he physically abused. She bore him a son but eventually left him due to the violence. Afterward, he went on another trip where he continued to assault and abuse women. On June 14, 2004, Following a 3-week trial, Francisco Arce Montes was found guilty of murdering and abusing Caroline Dickinson. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The victim's parents felt a sense of relief, believing that their 8 years of waiting for justice and their activism had led to the conviction of their daughter's murderer. However, the situation did not end there. After 20 years, he filed an appeal but later withdrew it. Everyone was shocked by the long list of offenses, which took around 10 minutes to read. Over the 20 years before receiving a life sentence, he committed 4 abuses in Germany. South American authorities also believe he abused at least a dozen women within their borders, in addition to attacking many others. Additionally, there was one attempted abuse in France before Caroline's death. It's evident that the true extent of his crimes could have been much larger, but the trial only considered officially recorded cases where victims had reported to the police. Notably, all the other victims survived. Caroline may have been the only one who did not survive after being abused. U.S. detectives investigating his case believe he is linked to a series of abuses and murders in both the U.S. and Europe. His conviction has led to serious questions about why he was not apprehended sooner. He could have been arrested in Spain as early as autumn 1997, a year after Caroline's murder, yet he avoided capture. The lack of cooperation among law enforcement agencies across European countries hindered the process of transferring him to the French gendarmerie. The parents of the victim were troubled by this as well. Despite Francisco's conviction, the victim's mother and father continued to voice their frustration about the insufficient collaboration between international authorities, which allowed criminals to keep committing offenses without facing consequences. The parents of Caroline pushed for the establishment of an international DNA database to help address the situation. Throughout their advocacy, they frequently shared their daughter's story. This case highlighted the importance of collaboration among law enforcement agencies, even across different continents, in stopping dangerous criminals. Francisco's legal troubles continued after Caroline's case. The last people heard from Francisco in 2015, when he was convicted of abusing a young woman, a year after he had killed Caroline. He was extradited to Spain to face charges for the abuse of an 18-year-old girl. He deceived her into allowing him into her apartment building by pretending he had lost his keys. Once inside, he threatened her with a knife and abused her. For this crime, he was extradited and tried in Spain, where he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. He is expected to serve his jail time in Spain once he has been released from prison in France, where he is scheduled to stay until January 2027. Francisco has nearly run out of options for appealing his sentence. His earliest opportunity for release will be in 2038. However, it is improbable that he will live to see his 88th birthday while imprisoned. An accident is an event from which no one is immune. At any moment, something unexpected can occur that completely changes the usual course of events. However, not everyone is able to accept the death of a loved one, and sometimes an accident turns into a catalyst for even more bloodshed. On the evening of July 1, 2016, Roberta Smargiassi was heading to her mother's house. At that time, she was 33 years old. She had been handling her business all Friday and was planning to visit her relatives to share some good news. Roberta wanted to prepare a festive dinner to gather all her relatives later. She was excited and hurried to reach her parents' house as soon as possible, using her scooter. Before leaving, Roberta called her mother to say she would be arriving soon. Unfortunately, she was not destined to reach her loved ones. Roberta was riding her scooter along the road when she moved through the green light. In the other lane, a young man named Italo Delisa was driving a Fiat Punto. He was only 21 years old. Despite the fact that the traffic light was red for him, he ignored it and continued driving. He did not notice the scooter that Roberta was riding. A collision occurred. After the impact, she crashed into the traffic light and fell onto the asphalt. The impact was quite strong, and she was thrown onto the sidewalk. Roberta sustained very serious injuries. Italo was confused but did not run away from the scene, he tried to provide first aid to Roberta. Witnesses immediately called the emergency services. When the medics arrived, they found the victim lying on the sidewalk with her head badly injured. Wounded, Roberta was barely clinging to life. They attempted to help her on the scene, but without specialized equipment, she would definitely not have survived. Therefore, she was urgently loaded into an ambulance and sent to the hospital in Vasto, Italy. The medics fought for her life on the way to the medical center. Upon arrival, Roberta was immediately taken to the surgical room for emergency surgery. Unfortunately, they were unable to save her, as her injuries were too severe. The cause of death was a craniocerebral injury due to her head hitting the pavement. Italo was also taken to the medical center. It turned out that he only sustained minor abrasions. There was no one else in his car. After treating his abrasions, Italo underwent testing for alcohol and prohibited substances in his blood. He did not refuse the examination and claimed he had not used anything. Italo expressed regret over what had happened, explaining that he had been distracted, accidentally ignored a red traffic light, and had not noticed Roberta on her small scooter. A toxicological examination confirmed that he was telling the truth. No alcohol or illegal substances were found in his blood. He behaved appropriately, reasoned calmly, was aware of the situation, and expressed remorse for what had transpired. When he was informed that the victim of the accident did not survive the collision, he burst into tears. Italo did not attempt to deny his guilt but continued to assert that it was all the result of a coincidence. Naturally, this provided little consolation for Roberta's loved ones. Her mother had been expecting to welcome her daughter home, but Roberta never arrived. She tried to call her daughter, but was unable to reach her. Eventually, she turned to Roberta's husband, who informed her about the accident. When the family received the tragic news, everyone was in shock. They blamed her death on the young man who had been inattentive behind the wheel. But none of this could bring Roberta back. 9 months before the tragedy, Roberta Smargiassi married a man named Fabio Di Lello, who was the love of her life. At the time of the fatal accident, Fabio was also 34 years old. They had known each other for many years before deciding to tie the knot. Fabio was a sporty and quite popular man, a well-known footballer who demonstrated excellent results in amateur tournaments. In 2015, he debuted in Serie D as a reserve player, and the entire family, including Roberta, was very proud of him. When they first met, Roberta worked in her father-in-law's bakery, as he owned one of the most popular bakeries in the city. After meeting Fabio, they began to build their relationship. Everyone saw their sincere love and believed that their marriage would be the best example of genuine feelings. Therefore, the tragic death of Roberta was a real blow for both families. Once all the paperwork was completed, funeral preparations began on July 3, 2016. The body was taken to the church, which was overflowing with the victim's family and friends. There were so many people that they couldn't all fit inside the building. Most of them crowded outside, waiting to say goodbye to the victim of the tragedy. Roberta's funeral was conducted by the priest who had married them on October 3, 2015. At that moment, of course, no one suspected that 9 months later the woman would be back here, but this time to be buried. This accident turned Fabio's life upside down. It was obvious from the start that he was having a hard time coping with this loss. After saying goodbye to Roberta, the families did not want to accept that Roberta had been taken from them by chance, and now they were demanding retribution against her killer. The most embittered of all was Fabio. He insisted that Italo had not accidentally hit his wife, so he demanded a thorough investigation in the hope of obtaining the maximum possible punishment for him. As part of the investigation, the Carabinieri spoke to witnesses. However, no one noticed inadequate behavior or any recklessness on the road. The driver calmly maneuvered his car and did not disturb anyone. Some witnesses even claimed not to have seen Roberta, arguing that she was moving on a small scooter, which was difficult to spot. The police had footage from surveillance cameras located in 3 places at the intersection, so the moment of the accident was recorded from different angles. All the recordings were carefully analyzed. In addition, they collected footage of both participants in the accident driving before the collision. Both behaved calmly on the road and followed the rules and speed limits, at least until Italo ran a red light. Fabio still wouldn't accept this. He insisted that Italo had broken the rules and was probably under the influence of illegal substances. He completely ignored the toxicology results, which showed that everyone involved in the accident was sober. In his anger, he rallied his entire family against Italo. However, this was not difficult, considering how much everyone loved Roberta. Under Italian law, as in many other countries, an accident was punished far less severely than murder, and serious grounds were needed to classify Roberta's death as murder. Law enforcement tried to build a case, but aside from the ignored red traffic light, there was no evidence to establish the fact of murder. All of this made Fabio even angrier. On July 15, 2016, he initiated a memorial procession in honor of his deceased wife, which dozens of concerned individuals attended. He demanded that the perpetrator be brought to justice and led a torchlight procession despite the pouring rain. Hundreds of people gathered to march. They walked through the streets of Vasto, chanting slogans against the killer. Fabio himself did not mince words. Most of the participants did not want to forget Roberta and hoped to honor her memory and achieve justice for the fatal accident. However, Fabio's overly aggressive and defiant behavior puzzled many. There was something more disturbing than grief in the air. It was the real hatred that Fabio felt for Italo. Even before this memorable march, accusations and very harsh statements about Italo began to surface on social media. Italo's family perceived the dissemination of discrediting information as inappropriate. They defended Italo, insisting that in life he was completely different from how Fabio tried to portray him. They argued that Italo made a fatal mistake but did so unintentionally and was not a murderer, according to his family. All of this even attracted the attention of the prosecutor investigating Roberta's death. The aggressive Fabio was only calmed by the threat of being accused of stalking. Although he became taciturn and stopped publicly confronting Italo, he did not cease inciting those around him against Italo in daily life. Initially, this had a particularly strong impact on the families of Roberta and Fabio. At Fabio's initiative, a large poster with Roberta's image appeared on her grave, and a bench was installed at the scene of the accident, serving as a memorial. At first, dozens of relatives and friends visited the grave to honor the memory of her. Almost everyone encountered Fabio, regardless of the time they came. He could be found at the grave at any hour of the day. While others managed to contain their pain of loss, the grief-stricken husband began to behave more and more strangely. He quit his job and spent whole days at the grave of his deceased wife. In the first few days after the funeral, he came there to pray. He stayed for a couple of hours but then left. However, by the end of the first week, he was spending long hours there, then he began to stay for the entire day. Fabio even brought food with him, having lunch and dinner near the grave. His behavior began to resemble insanity. He could not come to terms with the loss of his beloved wife. He arrived as soon as the cemetery gates opened and left only before they closed. The situation worsened. Several times, he was spotted when the cemetery was already closing. At first, Fabio was stopped by the locked gates, but he began to climb over the wall. Local workers noticed that Fabio began spending the night on his wife's grave. It got to the point where he spent almost the entire day at the cemetery and refused to leave. When Fabio's relatives asked him about this, he stated that his wife's grave was the only place where he felt a connection and closeness to his late wife, as well as a semblance of peace. The rest of the time, he could not find peace, as the thought of the injustice of her death troubled him incessantly. He flatly refused to accept that Roberta was no longer alive. Relatives tried to support him, but Fabio became increasingly irritable, unpredictable. It was enough to merely mention Roberta's name, and he would explode in anger and behave aggressively. He claimed that money had not helped save Roberta, and therefore it was useless. Fabio's relatives began to fear that his mental state had deteriorated. The only consolation for him was the ongoing investigation into the accident. Fabio looked forward to the person responsible being sent to prison for a long time. That is why the events that followed unsettled him even more. A few days before Christmas, Italo's lawyer managed to find mitigating circumstances in the case. Firstly, Italo was doing volunteer work and was so socially active in this area that his efforts proved to be very beneficial. Several people spoke highly of him, stating that he had a very positive impact on their lives. Secondly, Italo had always dreamed of becoming a firefighter and serving the community. He also had no other misdemeanors, and there was no talk of a criminal record. He had not even violated traffic rules before. In addition, a thorough analysis of the video footage from the intersection showed that Roberta herself did not follow the rules. The footage revealed that she was driving without a helmet, and Italo's car was not exceeding the speed limit. He was respecting the limit despite ignoring the red traffic light. It was believed that if she had taken care of her safety and worn a helmet, the severe head injury could have been avoided, and she might have survived the collision. Fabio attended the preliminary hearing for Roberta's death hoping for justice. When he heard Italo's defense regarding mitigating circumstances, he exploded in a fit of uncontrollable rage. Several family members had to hold him back, fearing that Fabio might attack Italo. The judge took into account the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense. The lawyer's arguments sounded quite convincing, and even Roberta's relatives were unaware that she had neglected to wear a helmet. In the eyes of others, the defendant no longer appeared to be the cruel man Fabio had painted him to be. But not to Fabio, he continued to regard Italo as a monster deserving the harshest punishment. A hearing was scheduled after which everyone dispersed. Italo remained free, at least until the trial's conclusion. As Fabio left the courtroom, he glared at Italo with long, piercing hatred. After that Christmas, Fabio's relatives noticed that his grief had reached its peak. He spent several days in front of his beloved's grave, kneeling and praying almost the entire time. This time, he did not even bring food with him, which looked very alarming. When asked about food, he chuckled, saying that he did not even feel hungry. Everyone was very concerned about Fabio's mental state, but any suggestions and attempts to send him to a doctor for help ended in conflict. Roberta's mother, father, brother, and other relatives tried several times to start a conversation about going to a psychiatrist for a consultation, but to no avail. The only thing he could think about, besides his wife, was the inability of law enforcement agencies to punish the insidious criminal Italo. The main hearing was scheduled for February 21, 2017. However, after hearing Italo's lawyer's defense and the judge's reaction, Fabio didn't have much hope for a harsh sentence. Hatred had consumed him completely. He craved not just justice, but also retribution. Judging by conversations with his loved ones, he had stopped believing in justice. By the end of 2016, he had become especially withdrawn and had almost no contact with his family. If he was not at his wife's grave, he would sit in his room, locked in, and eat almost nothing. Everyone was worried about his health, completely overlooking some important circumstances. Fabio had received a firearms license 10 years before these events, and in the following years, he regularly visited the shooting range to practice shooting. What had long been a simple hobby now seemed like the only right way out. Even worse, in September 2016, Fabio legally acquired a 9mm pistol, as he had all the necessary documents and the appropriate level of training. By the end of December 2016, Fabio's parents noticed that he had radically changed the design of his social media page. He posted gloomy updates with sad thoughts and also shared a scene from the film Gladiator, where the main character returns from the war to find that his entire family has been killed. Friends assumed this was how he was processing the bitterness of his loss and found his reflection in the movie's hero. In fact, it wasn't just his sadness and desire for justice that drove him. He was now consumed by a thirst for revenge. He felt that law enforcement was not on the side of good but was instead supporting the bad guy. The slowness and inefficiency of the justice system felt like a mockery of Roberta's death. Those close to him did not believe that the once good-natured Fabio could take up arms, and the photo from the film reflected his desire for lynching. After that, he made several more posts on his page. All of them were about the search for justice, but he did not hint at or indicate what he was planning to do. These were rather abstract musings, questions that concealed something much more disturbing. On February 1, 2017, Italo went to a cafe located in Vasto, Abruzzo. He visited this place periodically to unwind, and recently he had been going there more often for obvious reasons. Italo spent a lot of time talking with friends and acquaintances. He was very upset by the tragedy involving Roberta. He repeatedly stated that he was not going to run from justice, so he was ready to accept any court decision. Now, Italo found himself at the cafe again in search of support. The upcoming hearing was set to take place in 3 weeks. The only thing that distinguished his visit to the cafe from any other day was that he ran into Fabio at the entrance. This meeting seemed strange, as Italo knew that Fabio lived on the other side of the city and that they had not crossed paths before here. They exchanged a few short phrases. Suddenly, Fabio pulled out his 9mm pistol. He caught Italo talking on his cell phone, and Italo's father was on the other end of the line. The first bullet hit Italo in the stomach, the second in the leg, and the third in the neck. He immediately fell, bleeding. His father heard his son take his last breath through the phone. The wound to the neck was fatal, the artery had been severed. Other cafe patrons rushed to the noise. Fabio immediately got into his car and fled the scene. When paramedics arrived at the cafe, they pronounced Italo dead. The Carabinieri quickly interviewed witnesses, and thanks to their statements, the shooter was soon identified. They arrived at Fabio's family home, where his relatives told them where he could be found. The Carabinieri went to Roberta's grave, expecting to find Fabio there. It was assumed that he would most likely end one's own life. A semi-automatic pistol was found in a plastic bag on the gravestone. Ballistics tests were later conducted, confirming that it was this gun that was used to shoot Italo. His father then made an official statement, convincing the public that Roberta's death was a tragic accident. Italo's father knew that his son would never intentionally harm anyone. He pointed out that Italo wouldn't even drive after drinking a beer. In his father's opinion, Italo should not have to pay for the tragic circumstances with his life, especially since Roberta herself did not take adequate care of her own safety. A few hours after the murder, Fabio was found. Before turning himself in, he called a friend, confessed that he had shot his wife's killer and was going to the cemetery to say goodbye to Roberta. At that time, he revealed why he had been so upset by his wife's death. The evening she went to visit her parents, Roberta was planning to cook a treat and share the good news that she had learned she was pregnant. Roberta was expecting a child with Fabio, and the pregnancy was still in its early stages. Until that moment, Fabio was the only one who knew about it, and he understood the full scale of the tragedy. In addition to the death of his wife in a traffic accident, he lost his child, which was a double blow for Fabio. After Italo's death, his father continued to clear his son's name from the negativity directed at him on the internet and in life. He needed to present all these arguments at the trial so that his son would not receive the same harsh punishment as real criminals who acted with malicious intent. The father believed that Fabio had acted unfairly towards his son. Fabio had created an atmosphere of hatred against Italo to such an extent that the whole country branded him as an Italian killer. In reality, according to Italo's father, he was a victim of circumstances. Italo was not evil. He took Roberta's death very hard and often shared his feelings with his father, stating that the only thing he would like to correct in his life was running a red light. Italo's father created a sort of memorial in front of the cafe where his son was shot, placing Italo's photo and candles there, visiting every day to honor his memory. Public opinion was divided on the matter. Some supported Roberta's husband, believing that Fabio had done the right thing by seeking revenge on the offender who took his wife and child. Others felt that Fabio had acted too harshly and should have waited for the court's decision. Italo would certainly have received a fair verdict. In fact, after Italo's murder, Fabio's parents expressed their condolences to his family. They revealed that they had sought medical assistance 2 days before the crime when Fabio's unpredictable behavior reached its limits. They realized that he needed qualified psychiatric help, even if it meant he would have to be committed. They noticed that his behavior was completely out of control, leading them to fear for his mental health and request his hospitalization. Unfortunately, bureaucratic obstacles and the inertia of the system prevented this from happening in time. If Fabio's parents' appeal had been successful and he had been hospitalized immediately, perhaps a second tragedy could have been avoided. On February 4, 2017, Italo's coffin was present at the Vasto Church. The funeral was attended by numerous friends and family members. The ceremony was led by the same priest who had previously addressed Roberta's unexpected passing. Aware of the tragic events, he encouraged everyone present to act with kindness and respect towards one another. He urged attendees to refrain from expressing hatred, especially on social media. During this challenging time, the priest hoped to foster unity and put an end to further violence. Rather than a hearing about Roberta's death, which was stopped because the accused had died, Fabio found himself in court facing a charge of first-degree murder. His lawyer tried to argue that Fabio had not planned the crime and sought to lessen his responsibility due to his serious mental health problems. This defense could have helped him avoid a life sentence. However, the prosecutor provided strong evidence against this claim. On March 24, 2017, the court convicted Fabio Di Lello and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. The lawyer highlighted the significant decline in the client's mental health following the death of his cherished wife. He struggled to handle her loss, and timely support was lacking. The lawyer submitted an appeal, leading to further evaluations. On July 10, 2018, the appellate court shortened the prison sentence to 20 years, citing a diagnosis of an acute mental disorder for Fabio during the attack. However, the prosecution was dissatisfied with this ruling and requested that the original 30-year sentence be reinstated. On November 13, 2019, the Court of Cassation dismissed the appeals. Consequently, the 20-year prison sentence became official and final. Initially, Fabio faced significant challenges during his imprisonment. He received regular support from a psychiatrist and a priest because of his high risk of ending one's own life. Over time, however, he began to improve and the risk diminished. Fabio remains in prison and is scheduled for release in 2037. Francavilla Fontana, a beautiful town in the Apulia region of Italy, is the hometown of Francesco Alfonsetti, 34. He seemed to lead a respectable and stable life as a surveyor, husband, and father of 3. In the eyes of his friends, neighbors, and colleagues, Francesco is a model man, devoted to his family and always knows how to balance work with his role as a husband and father at home. He cultivated the image of a man who cherished his family above all else. But behind that glitzy exterior, a secret is waiting to be revealed, changing the lives of many. For 3 years, Francesco had been secretly engaged to a 22-year-old dentistry student named Eleonora Salome. She was bright, loving, and deeply attached to him. Living in a quiet town near Pescara in the Abruzzo region, she came from a well-off family. Her mother, Elizabeth Landsman, a Dutch jewelry dealer, primarily worked in southern Italy, while her father, an Italian engineer, was based in Venice. Although her parents lived apart due to their careers, they were both actively involved in her life. Francesco quickly integrates into Eleonora's life, attending dinners and gatherings, and is accepted by her family as a prospective son-in-law. During a family dinner in May 2001, everything seemed normal until Eleonora's father casually asked a pressing question about when the wedding was. Francesco hesitated momentarily but replied calmly, saying they would marry once Eleonora completed her studies. The moment passed without further discussion. No one at the table suspected that Francesco was living a double life. Months later, in late October, Eleonora arrived at her mother Elizabeth's apartment to find it unusually quiet. The doorbell went unanswered, so she used her key to enter. Inside, she discovered something that left her stunned, a lone envelope with her name written on it in Elizabeth's handwriting. The letter inside revealed shocking news. Elizabeth explained that she was leaving everything behind, her home, her life, and even her daughter, to start anew elsewhere. She wrote about love, regret, and needing space, but provided no clear explanation for her abrupt decision or her destination. She had completely disappeared. Panicked, Eleonora tried calling her mother, Elizabeth's, cell phone but found it unreachable. She immediately contacted her father in Venice. He was equally shocked. He assured Eleonora that there hadn't been any recent arguments or issues with Elizabeth, though he acknowledged that she often expressed frustration about their long-distance relationship. Nonetheless, he had never imagined she would simply vanish. The possibility of her seeing someone else was quickly dismissed. She had always been open with Eleonora, and concealing such a secret seemed unimaginable. As they struggled to piece together what had happened, one possible explanation arose. Perhaps Elizabeth's disappearance was a dramatic act of protest, a way to express her dissatisfaction with her circumstances. But as days turned into weeks, her silence grew more ominous. Desperate, Eleonora turned to Francesco, her trusted fiancé. He listened empathetically and reassured her, suggesting that Elizabeth's actions were likely temporary and that Elizabeth would eventually return once her emotions settled. However, Elizabeth didn't return. Days stretched into weeks, still no calls, no letters, no signs, only an unsettling absence. The mystery deepened when Eleonora received a postcard from her mother, Elizabeth, postmarked from Austria. The postcard, containing a brief message signed with Elizabeth's name, offered no clarity. Instead, it heightened Eleonora's confusion. Why had her mother fled without warning? Why send a postcard instead of making a call or writing a proper letter? The gesture felt distant, even cold, as though someone else might have written it. During this period, Francesco stood by Eleonora, an unwavering pillar of support. He comforted her through sleepless nights and the ache of uncertainty. Yet beneath her grief, Eleonora began to feel a growing sense of dread. Something about her mother's disappearance felt wrong. This was not a simple decision made on impulse by an overwhelmed woman. Her instincts whispered that something darker, more sinister, was at play. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in southern Germany, a terrible discovery is about to change everything. On the morning of November 6, 2001, in a remote mountainous area, a local woman was driving on a road that was still wet from the previous night's rain. In the early morning light, she noticed something unusual on the otherwise quiet stretch of road. At first, it appeared as a strange, indistinct shape on the asphalt. But as her car drew closer, a sense of dread overtook her. Lying lifeless in the middle of the road was the body of a woman. The victim was nearly naked, wearing only underwear, and his body was covered in blood. Bruises covered the woman's wrists and arms, clear evidence of a violent struggle. Her face was so severely disfigured that her identity was unrecognizable. When investigators arrived shortly afterward, it became evident that this was no ordinary hit-and-run accident. The victim had been savagely attacked until she lost consciousness and then repeatedly run over by a vehicle. Whoever was responsible hadn't just tried to end her life, they had attempted to erase her. Near the body, investigators found a pair of earrings but no other personal belongings. There was no purse, no identification, and no clothing beyond her underwear. The perpetrator appeared to have taken careful steps to delay her identification. However, the earrings appeared to have been left behind unintentionally, perhaps by the perpetrator in a hurry to leave. Later that day, an autopsy was performed. The victim was estimated to be between 25 and 30 years old, and the cause of death was determined to be internal bleeding resulting from severe trauma to her organs, consistent with being repeatedly run over. She had died just a few hours before her body was discovered. One additional detail came to light during the autopsy. The victim had been pregnant and given birth at least once in the past. While this provided a small lead for investigators, they still needed more evidence. Forensic testing was ordered, but the results would take time. Luckily, investigators soon caught a break. That same morning, a passerby walking about 30 meters from the crime scene discovered a plastic bag discarded near the riverbank. Inside, they found women's clothing. Sensing something unusual, they alerted the police. Upon examining the items, authorities confirmed they belonged to the same woman. A bra in the bag matched the lingerie she had been wearing. Every piece of clothing, its style, size, and labels, was identified as hers. In particular, the labels on the clothes were all from Italian brands, suggesting that the victims may have been Italian or had connections to Italy. A special investigative team was promptly assembled, and their first priority was identifying the victim. Despite scouring missing persons databases in both Germany and Italy, no matches were found. Even after expanding the search to 48 countries, they still found no clues. The woman appeared to have been wiped clean of all traces, no name, no identity, no missing person record. Investigators held on to one glimmer of hope: DNA recovered from beneath the victim's fingernails. This suggested she had fought back during the violent struggle, possibly injuring her attacker. However, the DNA did not match any profiles in either national or international databases, which implied that the perpetrator had no criminal record, or at least no documented one. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Despite exhaustive efforts, the victim's identity remained unknown. Com ko bao tsao now vi nuoi mat tich de lam man moi, kak na ju tra roi veo bitak. The woman had become a chilling symbol of how someone could simply vanish from the world without leaving a trace. As frustration mounted, investigators decided to revisit their forensic analysis. Could the victim's age estimate have been incorrect? A second evaluation was ordered. This time, forensic experts concluded she was closer to 45 years old, not in her late 20s or early 30s as initially thought. Unfortunately, this significant adjustment did not lead to any new leads. Missing persons databases continued to yield no results. As a final effort, authorities turned to the public for assistance. A facial reconstruction based on the structure of the victim's skull was prepared, creating a post-mortem likeness of her. The image was widely circulated in both German and Italian media, including newspapers and popular true crime programs, in the hope that someone might recognize her. Tragically, no one did. 9 months after the body was discovered, in August 2002, the Special Investigative Commission was officially disbanded, and the case was handed over to a team of just 3 officers. Despite the large amount of work and the long time that has passed, they still cannot ignore the mystery surrounding the identity of the unknown woman. She was well-dressed, wearing expensive clothes that suggested a life of comfort and privilege. Yet, no family, friends, or colleagues had come forward to claim her. Why? The investigators pressed on, focusing on the limited evidence they had left: her clothing. One item stood out: her jacket. It wasn't mass-produced, and the label revealed it came from a small Italian fashion brand. Through painstaking research, the officers discovered only 14 jackets had been made with that specific label and design. However, progress soon hit a roadblock. The Italian company that made the jacket refused to share its customer records. German investigators needed a warrant to access the files, but without jurisdiction in Italy, they couldn't obtain one. Though Italian police were looped in, they dismissed the jacket as unimportant and declined to act on it. Undeterred, the German team pursued the case through formal international cooperation. They submitted requests for assistance to the Italian judiciary. Their initial request went unanswered, as did subsequent ones. A full year passed without progress. Finally, in late October 2003, a breakthrough came. Italian authorities granted the warrant. Italian police have searched the company's headquarters, while German investigators await new information. The search revealed that all 14 jackets were initially displayed at a fashion show before being returned to the company and sold to retail stores. However, the company kept no receipts or records of where the jackets were distributed or who purchased them. This is a serious error. Weeks passed, and the case lost momentum. Then, out of the blue, a phone call reignited hope. An employee of the fashion company, while watching a true crime segment on Italian TV, recognized the label from the jacket. She remembered that 9 of the jackets had been sent to a boutique in Bologna, though she couldn't provide information about the remaining 5. Still, it was a lead. The German team acted immediately, alerting their Italian counterparts. Bologna police located the boutique and retrieved its sales records. 7 of the jackets had been purchased in cash, providing no further clues. However, 2 other coats were purchased with a credit card, opening up a vital clue. If one of the cardholders is the victim, the woman's identity may be cleared up. The investigation moved quickly. Investigators obtained the card details and traced the buyers' names. Both the German and Italian teams anxiously awaited results. This was their best chance at solving the mystery. One buyer was a man from Sardinia, who was quickly ruled out. The other was Elisabeth Landsman, a Dutch-born jewelry dealer who had been living in southern Italy. Elizabeth's age matched the victim's revised estimate, and records showed she had purchased the jacket on October 2, 1999. This gave the investigation team even more hope. Italian police tracked down Elizabeth's last known address. Neighbors remembered her vaguely, noting she hadn't been seen in 2 or 3 years. Her daughter, Eleonora, occasionally visited to empty the mailbox. Further investigation revealed more about Elizabeth's life. Her husband, aged 58, lived in Bologna, and their adult daughter had been studying dentistry in Pescara and living nearby in 2001. Bit by bit, the pieces formed a clearer picture. Italian authorities shared all the information with the German team. Then came the pivotal moment. Along with the details, Italy sent over a scanned copy of Elisabeth Landsman's passport photo. When German investigators opened the file, it was immediately clear. The face in the photo was nearly identical to the forensic reconstruction they had painstakingly created. After more than 2 years of persistent investigation, the identity of the mystery woman found on a remote, cold road in Germany was finally uncovered. Her name was Elizabeth, a discovery that initially seemed almost impossible but marked a pivotal breakthrough in the case. With Elizabeth's identity now confirmed, investigators shifted their focus to uncovering who might have wanted her dead. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, who was brought in for questioning. When shown photos of Elizabeth's remains, he had an emotional reaction, immediately recognizing her and breaking down in tears. When asked why he hadn't reported Elizabeth missing, he admitted that she had told both him and their daughter that she was leaving permanently. She had even sent postcards from abroad to reinforce her claim. Embarrassed and believing he had been abandoned, he told neighbors she had passed away, fabricating her death to avoid public shame. However, his DNA did not match the sample found under Elizabeth's fingernails. His story, though tragic, was consistent, and the police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. A significant lead later emerged when Elizabeth's mobile phone was discovered in the possession of a woman in Francavilla Fontana, a small town in southern Italy. The woman claimed she didn't know Elizabeth and said the phone had been a gift from her husband, Francesco Alfonsetti. This revelation drastically changed the course of the investigation. Francesco, who had been engaged to Elizabeth's daughter Eleonora, now appeared to have connections to Elizabeth as well. His wife, who lived with him in Francavilla Fontana, was completely unaware of his secret life. Suddenly, Francesco, once seen as a background figure, became the prime suspect. However, investigators lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him immediately. They arranged a formal interview with Eleonora to gather more information. The interview was scheduled for Sunday, January 18, 2004, but it never took place. On Saturday, January 17, Eleonora was found dead. Francesco, who was present at the time, alleged that he had tried to stop her and begged her not to harm herself. However, the circumstances surrounding her death appear to be extremely unusual. The police arrested Francesco on suspicion of lying, but to convict him, clearer evidence is needed instead of just relying on speculation. With both Elizabeth and Eleonora tragically gone, Francesco remained the only living link to the truth. His explanation was astonishing. He accused Eleonora of killing her own mother in Germany out of guilt, attributing her subsequent death to remorse. Investigators did not believe any part of his account. After much effort, authorities pieced together a likely sequence of events. Francesco, though publicly engaged to Eleonora, had secretly been having an affair with her mother, Elizabeth. After receiving a large inheritance from her father, Elizabeth had entrusted €150,000 to Francesco, possibly as a loan or investment. It remains unclear whether Eleonora knew about the affair or the money. By the summer of 2001, Elizabeth appeared troubled and likely decided to end her relationship with Francesco and distance herself. She traveled to Germany and met with him there on November 1st. The autopsy revealed that they had been intimate during this encounter, but the meeting turned violent. Investigators believe Elizabeth demanded her money back, but Francesco refused. In the ensuing confrontation, he killed her and then repeatedly ran over her body with a vehicle to disguise her identity. He disposed of her belongings and returned to his deceptive double life, pretending to be a caring fiancé to Eleonora while maintaining his role as a family man in Italy. For the next 2 years, Francesco continued this double life. But as investigators closed in and summoned Eleonora for questioning, Francesco likely felt his lies unraveling. Authorities believe that he staged Eleonora's death to appear as if she had caused it herself, although they initially lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. At first, Francesco was charged only with Elizabeth's murder. In 2007, an Italian court found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. In 2009, new evidence emerged, allowing authorities to charge him with Eleonora's murder as well. By 2011, the court convicted him of both murders, resulting in a second life sentence. The layers of lies and betrayal were finally exposed. Francesco Alfonsetti has ruthlessly taken 2 lives, and now his fate is sealed, a life behind bars. Amelia Lily Carr was born on August 4, 1984. She grew up in Marion, Florida, with her parents, 2 older brothers, and younger sister. Amelia's childhood was far from ideal. From a young age, she was subjected to abuse by her own father and grandfather, the very people who were supposed to protect her and ensure her safety. When the authorities learned about the investigation involving minors, all 4 children were removed from the family. Amelia's father was arrested and held accountable. He was ordered to complete a court-mandated program. For some reason, he wasn't sent to prison. After a while, the children were returned to the family where the abuse resumed. This continued throughout Amelia's childhood and teenage years. The authorities turned a blind eye, believing her father had changed. Worst of all, the girl's mother also ignored what was happening. Even though she clearly saw how her daughter suffered, she did nothing. Amelia described the horror she felt almost every night when she went to bed. As soon as she heard the creak of floorboards outside her room, she knew her father or grandfather would abuse her again. At school, Amelia pretended everything was fine at home. She focused on her studies to achieve something in life and truly excelled. Her IQ was 125. Amelia was an excellent student and believed a good education would help her change her situation. When she turned 15, the abuse was still ongoing. But now Amelia began to fear for her younger sister, who was 13 at the time. She suspected that her sister was also being abused. The sisters were incredibly close. The younger girl was born with several congenital defects, and Amelia felt obligated to protect her. Amelia went to the school administrator and told them everything that was happening at home. As soon as the teachers learned about the abuse in the family, her father was immediately arrested. This time, he was actually charged and was set to appear in court. Amelia, her mother, and maternal grandmother were ready to testify. Instead of admitting guilt and trying to fix the situation, Amelia's father decided to take action. He wasn't going to spend time in prison and hired a hitman to get rid of his wife, mother-in-law, and eldest daughter all at once. But apparently, he was in such a hurry to deal with his family that he approached the wrong person. It turned out the hitman he hired was an undercover police officer. Amelia's father was sentenced to only 4 years in prison, despite abusing Amelia for 10 years, possibly abusing her younger sister, and hiring a hitman to kill his family. This prison sentence, however short, gave Amelia the chance to rebuild her life and escape the abuse. She was finally able to protect her younger sister. For the first time, Amelia was thriving. She discovered a passion for photography, began a modeling career, and joined the military. Unfortunately, her difficult childhood left a mark on Amelia. She had endured too much. On one hand, she felt guilty for sending her own father to prison. On the other, she was incredibly angry at her mother for allowing her husband to abuse the children, for not intervening or protecting them. Amelia was torn by conflicting emotions and had to cope with them somehow. Eventually, she left her mother's home and lived in various foster families. Then she dropped out of school and at 17 became pregnant. The father of the child was a man much older than her. To avoid legal trouble for him, Amelia married him. The marriage was doomed from the start, and they soon divorced. After that, Amelia changed partners frequently, constantly entering relationships that weren't right for her. As a result, she had 2 more children with 2 different men. Amelia periodically got involved in criminal activities, even being convicted for helping her ex-husband steal exotic birds. By the age of 21, she was a single mother with 3 children. Realizing she was on the wrong path, Amelia decided to turn her life around and settle down. She earned her high school diploma, trained as a massage therapist, and began earning a decent living. It was at this point in her life that Amelia met Joshua Damian Fulgham and Heather Strawn, who would play a significant role in her story. Joshua and Heather were about 3 years older than Amelia and had been together since high school. Joshua was born in 1981 in Mississippi. Like Amelia, he had a troubled childhood. Around the age of 7, his mother's new partner began physically abusing him. Joshua was frequently bruised and suffered several head injuries, causing him to repeat grades and eventually be expelled from school. His grandmother was his closest confidant. She understood him like no one else, tried to ease his suffering. Sadly, she passed away when Joshua was a teenager. This loss was devastating. His life spiraled out of control. He turned to alcohol, banned substance to cope, and became involved in criminal activities. Joshua committed arson, burglaries, eventually getting caught and spending time in juvenile detention centers. After one of his releases, he met Heather Strawn. Heather, also 16, was kind and gentle, with a perpetually smiling face. She offered support, care. Heather worked as a waitress. When they met at the cafe, they were instantly drawn to each other. It was their first teenage love. When a family member attacked Heather, Joshua and his mother took her in. They began living together. At 18, Heather became pregnant with Joshua's child, and their first son was born. Joshua settled down, got a job in trailer construction, installation, so they were able to move out on their own. However, Joshua soon relapsed into banned substance use, and his life began to fall apart. He lost his job. They quickly ran out of money. To support his addiction, Joshua started selling banned substance and, eventually, producing psychoactive substances. His drug addiction dramatically changed his personality, making him angry, volatile, and aggressive. He began physically abusing Heather, cheating on her, and acting erratically. Concerned for her child, Heather packed her things, moved with the baby to her grandmother's house. This became a recurring pattern. Heather would leave, Joshua would pull himself together, clean the house, and beg her to return, promising he was done with banned substance and things would be different. But the cycle would repeat itself. During one of these periods of breaking up and getting back together, Heather became pregnant again. Deeming their life too unstable for another child, they decided to give the baby up for adoption. This difficult decision was a turning point for Joshua. He realized he needed to get his act together, or he would lose everything. In 2003, Heather and Joshua, now 21, tried to start over. They moved from Mississippi to Marion County, Florida, where Joshua's other grandmother lived. She helped them get back on their feet. Everything seemed to be going well until they met Amelia Carr. And then everything started to unravel, especially for Heather. At the time, Amelia was dating Jamie Acum, a childhood friend and the father of one of her children. Their relationship was complicated, marked by frequent breakups and reconciliations. After Joshua and Heather moved to Florida, the two couples met and began spending time together. Soon after, Heather became pregnant with her third child. Unfortunately, instead of becoming a loving father, Joshua relapsed. He became excessively aggressive and, frustrated by Heather's lack of intimacy due to her pregnancy, began cheating on her again. Somehow, Amelia and Joshua transitioned from friends to lovers. The death of a mutual friend in a car accident left them devastated. Seeking comfort, they turned to each other, slept together, marking the beginning of their affair. Amelia and Jamie were on a break at the time, so he was unaware of what was happening, and the lovers met almost daily. Heather, pregnant and vulnerable, remained clueless about the true nature of their relationship. When Heather gave birth, she bore the brunt of the childcare responsibilities. Joshua found spending time with Amelia far more appealing than caring for his newborn. The affair lasted nearly a year before Heather finally discovered the betrayal by her friend Amelia and her beloved Joshua. Utterly devastated, she packed her belongings, took the children, returned to Mississippi. He realized he truly needed only Heather and that Amelia was merely a way to satisfy his physical desires. Joshua had never been truly in love with Amelia. After reflection, he ended things with Amelia and, 2 weeks later, went to Mississippi to win Heather back. He swore he would never look at another woman, that he couldn't be happy without her, and that he would devote himself to making her, the children, happy. Heather, swayed by his promises, took him back, marking the beginning of a turbulent and endless love triangle. Heather and Joshua lived in Mississippi for 5 months, during which time everything was wonderful. However, their decision to return to Florida proved disastrous. Back in Marion County, he almost immediately resumed drinking and using illegal substances, becoming aggressive once more. This behavior led to constant arguments and family disputes. After another breakup, Joshua ran back to Amelia, seeking solace in her bed. Unsatisfied with this arrangement, Heather now sought to bring Joshua back into the family. This cycle continued for months, with Joshua oscillating between the two women until all parties seemingly entered into a polyamorous relationship, a relationship structure characterized by having romantic relationships with multiple partners with the consent of all involved. Rumors even circulated that Heather and Amelia were also in a relationship with each other. Both women wanted Joshua all to themselves and put up with sharing him because they were afraid he would leave them. In June 2008, Heather approached her 26th birthday, ended her relationship with Joshua because she no longer wanted to compete for his attention. Shortly after this breakup, Heather, who had been working part-time as a nanny for Ben, a single father, began a romantic relationship with him. Heather was attracted to Ben's calm personality and felt a real connection with him. Furthermore, their children were close in age. Their friendship developed into a romance after Heather finally separated from Joshua. Heather was finally happy, enjoying a respectful relationship with someone who looked forward to her coming home. Their children got along well, making everything seem perfect, except for one issue: Joshua. He refused to let Heather be happy without him. Initially, he disbelieved that she would actually leave him and build a life of her own. But upon realizing the reality, he became obsessed with Heather and Ben's relationship. Joshua began stalking them, driving by Ben's house at night, waiting for them on the street, and even making violent threats if they didn't break up. Meanwhile, Joshua was still living with Amelia, who either didn't care about his obsession with his ex or was willing to tolerate his behavior as long as he remained with her. By November 2008, Heather and Ben had been in a stable, loving relationship for approximately 5 months, and they were both happy. Joshua and Amelia were also still living together. That summer, Amelia became pregnant. In November, Josh proposed to her. News of the engagement quickly reached Heather. Her good mood vanished. She had borne Joshua 3 children, stood by him through the toughest times, endured his unbearable behavior, and yet another woman received his proposal. This deeply hurt Heather, caused her immense pain. She began reevaluating her relationship with Ben and concluded that she was still in love with Joshua. After telling Ben she wanted to end things, Heather called Joshua and said she wanted to reconcile. Naturally, given the choice between Amelia and Heather, Joshua always chose Heather. He immediately broke things off with the pregnant Amelia and asked for the engagement ring back. A few days later, Joshua proposed to Heather with the same ring. Then, Joshua and Heather registered their marriage, officially exchanging vows. A mere 10 minutes after the ceremony, Joshua called Amelia for a friendly chat that was just the beginning. Within days of the wedding, Joshua and Heather began arguing. There was no honeymoon period. Things deteriorated so rapidly that a week and a half after the wedding, Joshua pointed a shotgun at Heather's face, threatened to shoot her. Terrified, Heather called the police. Joshua was arrested and charged with aggravated assault with a firearm. He was sent to jail to await trial. At that moment, Heather sold her engagement ring and, while Joshua was in jail, began dating a man named Jamie Acum. Jamie had appeared earlier in the story. He was Amelia's ex-boyfriend and the father of one of her children. He was also Joshua's best friend when Joshua and Heather first moved to Florida. They hung out as couples and often spent time together as a group of four. During this time, Amelia visited Joshua in jail. He was furious at Heather for putting him behind bars, even though he was the one who threatened her with a shotgun. Joshua was convinced Heather had deliberately set him up to ruin his life. Now he and Amelia were together again, and Joshua constantly vented his grievances about Heather to her. Wanting to be the only one, Amelia egged him on even more. Deep down, she wanted her rival gone from their lives forever, believing that the only way to stay with Joshua was to eliminate Heather. Joshua was already on edge in jail, and Amelia kept pressing his sore spots. At some point, it worked. Joshua no longer wanted Heather. Now, he wanted to be with Amelia alone. But he was in jail awaiting trial, and something needed to be done to make Heather drop the charges. The wildest part of this whole situation was that Amelia and Heather were still on good terms. They weren't best friends, but they communicated normally. Amelia sometimes looked after Heather's children when she needed to step out. Amelia would come to Heather's house and try to convince her to drop the charges against Joshua. She tried to remain calm until she learned that Heather was dating Jamie, the father of one of her children. At that moment, everything changed, and Amelia lost her temper. She grabbed a knife, held it to Heather's throat, and demanded that she drop the charges. Amelia eventually calmed down, but she now deeply resented Heather. Driven by her resentment, Amelia offered $500 to acquaintances, friends, and relatives to break her neck. Amelia's actions escalated when she offered Jamie money to kill his girlfriend, Heather. The people she approached with such a wild request thought it was a joke, and naturally, no one agreed. However, the information reached Heather, terrifying her. She dropped the charges against Joshua. On February 6, 2009, after a month in jail, Joshua was released, and events took a tragic turn. Immediately upon leaving jail, he felt an urgent need to see his children. He went to Heather's house and discovered she was now dating Jamie, his best friend. Furthermore, Jamie was driving Joshua's car. Joshua was furious that Heather had replaced him so quickly. He yelled, cursed, and declared he would take custody of their children away from her. She retorted that he wouldn't see the children at all until he changed his behavior. Joshua seemed to ignore the part about changing his behavior. Instead, he interpreted Heather's words to mean she would return to Mississippi and take the children, ensuring he would never see them again. Joshua's anger grew because Amelia encouraged him, demanding that Heather be punished. 9 days after Joshua's release, Heather Strong disappeared. No one had any idea where she could have gone. On February 15, 2009, Heather didn't show up for her shift as a waitress at a gas station cafe. She had never missed work before, and this was very uncharacteristic. Earlier that day, Heather had called her boyfriend, Jamie, tearfully saying that Joshua was coming to pick up his children and that she would try to convince him to leave them alone. Jamie was used to the constant drama between the former spouses and didn't pay much attention to the call. But when he returned home that evening, neither Heather nor the children were there. Some of their belongings were also missing, suggesting she had gone somewhere. Jamie tried calling Heather, but she didn't answer. Then he called Joshua, who told Jamie that Heather had come back to him and they were a family again, asking Jamie not to bother them anymore. Jamie wasn't surprised. He had accepted that Heather and Joshua would occasionally break up and make up, so he reluctantly let it go. 10 days passed since Heather's disappearance. Joshua told everyone that Heather had brought him the children and then left for Mississippi because she needed a break. But that didn't sound like Heather at all. People began to suspect something was wrong. Heather would never have left her children with Joshua for such a long time because she didn't trust him. Gradually, the rumors reached Mississippi. Heather's family, where she supposedly returned, was very surprised. They hadn't heard from her in almost 2 weeks. Her relatives raised the alarm and reported Heather missing. The police immediately began an investigation. Joshua was the prime suspect, as the authorities were already aware of domestic violence in the family. He told them the story that Heather had brought the children and then left for Mississippi to rest and gather her thoughts. He even showed the officers a document where Heather voluntarily transferred custody of the children to him. While there was no immediate cause to charge Joshua, the police's suspicions remained. On March 18, over a month after Heather's disappearance, police received a report that cash had been withdrawn from her bank card at an ATM. Detectives reviewed the surveillance footage and discovered that Joshua had used her card, providing enough cause to arrest him. During interrogation, officers learned of another key witness, Amelia Carr, who was also implicated in Heather Strong's disappearance. Amelia voluntarily came to the station, convincingly playing the role of a concerned friend offering to assist the investigation. To elicit a confession, Amelia and Joshua were questioned simultaneously in separate rooms. Soon, the police discovered that Amelia had offered acquaintances $500 to kill Heather. They also learned that, during an argument, she had held a knife to Heather's throat and threatened Heather's life. After these details were revealed, Amelia visibly grew nervous, although she tried to maintain a calm facade and claimed she had no conflicts with anyone. The detectives tried to trick Joshua and Amelia by telling each one that the other had already confessed and was blaming each other. Amelia quickly realized she needed to protect herself and declared she would tell the truth if granted immunity from prosecution. However, the detectives couldn't agree to this, as she was a potential criminal. They decided to press Joshua harder. He eventually broke. The interrogations, which lasted several days, were exhausting. Joshua confessed that while he didn't directly take Heather's life, he was still guilty. He explained that on February 15, 2009, the day Heather disappeared, he had snapped. He genuinely believed Heather would take his children and prevent him from seeing them. Much of this fear was fueled by Amelia, who constantly provoked him, leading him to believe that something needed to be done to remove Heather from the picture. Their plan was to lure Heather to Amelia's trailer, allegedly by promising her money. Heather brought the children to Joshua's house and then they ended up at Amelia's trailer. Inside, an argument erupted between Heather and Joshua, during which an enraged Amelia stormed in and struck Heather on the head with a flashlight, causing her to lose consciousness. Joshua and Amelia sat her in a computer chair, bound her hands and feet with duct tape, and taped her mouth shut to prevent her from making any noise. When Heather regained consciousness, Joshua presented her with a document where she voluntarily transferred custody of the children to him and demanded she sign it. At first, Heather refused, so Joshua threatened her life. Eventually, Heather signed the document, seemingly giving Joshua what he wanted. However, Amelia intervened, convincing Joshua that letting Heather go was dangerous because she would seek revenge. She argued that the only way to silence her was to eliminate her permanently, and Joshua agreed. Amelia first tried to break Heather's neck, relying on her skills as a massage therapist, but she lacked the strength. Next, she put a trash bag over Heather's head and wrapped duct tape around her neck in an attempt to suffocate her, but that also failed. Finally, Amelia pinched Heather's nose shut, cutting off her air supply. With her mouth taped shut, Heather had no way to breathe. She initially resisted, but soon her body went limp. When no one was looking, Joshua and Amelia put Heather's body in a suitcase and buried it in the backyard. Later, Joshua showed the detectives where he had buried Heather Strong's body. Although the police now had Joshua's confession, Amelia remained silent. The detectives lacked any concrete evidence proving her direct involvement in the crime and struggled to extract the truth from her. That's when Joshua's sister intervened. She came to the police station and offered to elicit a confession from Amelia, not wanting her brother to be convicted for a crime primarily orchestrated by someone else. The investigators arranged a meeting between Joshua's sister and Amelia, equipping Joshua's sister with a listening device. As the women were friends, a walk in the park together wouldn't arouse suspicion. During the walk, Joshua's sister insisted that Amelia tell her the truth. Unaware that her friend was wearing a wire, Amelia fully corroborated Joshua's story, describing the various methods they used to try to kill Heather. The detectives listened to her entire account. This provided the police with the evidence they needed. Amelia Carr and Joshua Damian Fulgham were charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. While in jail awaiting trial, Amelia gave birth to her fourth child, who was immediately given up for adoption. Her other 3 children, along with Heather and Joshua's 2 children, were placed in foster care. Unable to manage their own lives and relationships, the irresponsible parents ruined the lives of several young children. 18 months later, in 2010, the case finally went to trial. Amelia Carr was the first to face the jury. She pleaded not guilty. The Carr family issued a statement arguing that Amelia's childhood abuse at the hands of her father and grandfather had traumatized her, potentially affecting her mental state. Her lawyer attempted to portray the defendant as a victim under Joshua's strict control and influence. However, the prosecution only needed to present the recording of her confession, which immediately exposed her deception. The jury found Amelia Carr guilty of first-degree murder. Next, they had to decide on the appropriate punishment. The grand jury voted 7-5 to sentence Amelia to death. At the age of 24, Amelia was placed on death row, becoming the youngest woman to receive such a severe verdict. She was officially sentenced to death by lethal injection on February 22, 2011. Joshua Damian Fulgham's trial occurred in April 2012. He pleaded not guilty, but the jury was split. 8 jurors favored life imprisonment, while 4 did not. Ultimately, he received a life sentence without parole for the same crime, based on the jury's recommendation. While both Joshua and Amelia were responsible for kidnapping Heather Strong in her death, Amelia was the one who directly caused Heather's death. This might explain why they received different sentences. While in prison, Amelia launched a campaign to prove her innocence, giving several interviews in which she again tried to portray herself as a victim of circumstances. She held the title of the youngest woman on death row for a considerable time. However, in 2017, after numerous appeals, her death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole because the jury's initial vote had not been unanimous. Often, crimes involving women receive more attention. But in this case, both perpetrators were guilty. The difference was that Joshua genuinely repented and took responsibility for his actions. He deeply regretted taking the life of the mother of his children and the woman he once loved. Amelia Carr, on the other hand, continued to deny everything and blame Joshua, never showing remorse. Yet both were equally responsible. Heather Strong was a kind, caring, and loving young woman with 2 children whom she loved more than anything. She worked hard to provide for them and wanted nothing more than to watch them grow. The tragedy is that it wasn't just Heather who suffered. Her children lost both parents at once. As 2015 came to a close, Angela Diaz was filled with hope. At 30 years old, her life seemed to be on track. She was confident, optimistic, and ready for a fresh start. She had recently met someone new online, and this connection felt different. His name was Ian Diaz, a 38-year-old U.S. Marshal. Their conversations quickly progressed from lighthearted to deep and meaningful. There was undeniable chemistry between them. The two met in person on January 2, 2016. From that moment, their relationship progressed quickly. Within weeks, Angela and Ian grew closer, moved in together, and soon got engaged. They married not long after and seemed happy, deeply in love, and focused on building a future together. Shortly after their wedding, Angela found out she was pregnant with twins, which made her feel as if all her dreams were coming true. Angela worked at a law firm, while Ian had built a stable career in law enforcement. Living in Anaheim, California, their life appeared perfect on the outside. However, that perfect image fell apart just months later. On the night of June 24, 2016, Angela came home as usual. She parked her car in the garage, but as she stepped out, a stranger suddenly appeared. Without warning, he charged at her. Angela fell to the ground, screaming in terror and trying to shield herself. Although she managed to escape serious injury, she was left shaken, bruised, and with her blouse torn. What scared Angela most wasn't the physical assault but the realization that the attack seemed premeditated. Someone had deliberately targeted her. She immediately called the police, already suspecting who might be behind it. While she didn't recognize her attacker, she believed she knew who had orchestrated the assault. For weeks leading up to the attack, Angela had been receiving disturbing anonymous emails. These messages were filled with threats, religious references, and violent language. The harassment allegedly started on May 29th, when Angela received an email stating that the sender hoped she was scared of the following day. The sender referred to herself as his princess, insulted Angela by calling her nothing, and warned her to watch her back. Shortly after, another message, written entirely in capital letters, was allegedly sent via LinkedIn, stating that Michelle was his one and only true love and that Angela was nothing to him. Michelle Hadley was Ian's ex-girlfriend. Their relationship had ended badly, marred by emotional fights and unresolved financial disputes. They had purchased a condo together and shared a mortgage, but their breakup had left them entangled in a bitter struggle over the property. At some point, Ian began receiving strange emails from Michelle as well. These messages, which initially expressed anger, gradually became more alarming. They contained religious imagery and threats, which unsettled Ian. He forwarded the emails to the police and his colleagues in law enforcement. He even applied for a restraining order against Michelle, citing her emotional instability and previous outbursts, but his request was denied. When Angela began receiving similar threats, she and Ian were convinced Michelle was responsible. Angela took legal action and applied for her own restraining order. She explained that she had never responded to the harassment, had blocked each email address, yet the messages kept coming from new accounts. On June 1, 2016, the court granted Michelle a restraining order, prohibiting her from contacting or having contact with Angela as required by law. Michelle was notified of the order via email. Afterward, law enforcement began treating the case more seriously. Just days later, officers went to Michelle's home to serve the restraining order in person, outlining the legal boundaries she now had to follow. For Angela and Ian, it felt like progress had finally been made. They allowed themselves a moment of relief, hoping that the harassment would finally stop. But their sense of safety was short-lived. About a week later, Angela and Ian's peace was abruptly disrupted by a knock on their door. When they opened it, they found a stranger standing outside. The man appeared calm, yet there was something unsettling about him. He said he came to see Angela, saying he was invited to help satisfy her deepest desires. Confused and alarmed, Angela and Ian listened as the man explained that he had responded to a Craigslist ad. The ad described a specific role-play scenario designed to resemble a violent, non-consensual encounter, though it suggested Angela would secretly welcome it. Horrified, Angela and Ian told the man that he was mistaken. He apologized and left, but the damage was already done. Someone had used Angela's identity online to post the ad, inviting strangers into her home, and the situation was far from over. Later that evening, while they were in their garage, things took a terrifying turn. Another man showed up at their home, but this time, he didn't knock or try to explain himself. Instead, he immediately lunged at Angela, as though following explicit instructions. She managed to escape unharmed, but the attack left her deeply shaken. Shortly after, the ad responsible for the incidents was discovered. It had been posted using Angela's name, photo, and home address. The post instructed men to go to her house and warned them that she might resist, but they were to proceed anyway. The ad was horrifying, violating Angela's privacy and putting her life, and the lives of her unborn twins, in grave danger. In the days that followed, more men came forward. Some had responded to similar ads but backed away once they realized the situation was real. Others, however, had arrived ready to act on what they believed to be a fantasy. Ian was furious. Being continuously harassed, receiving threats of violence, and facing indifference from authorities pushed him into a state of despair. He publicly voiced his anger, demanding that Michelle, the person he believed responsible, be arrested and jailed immediately. Eventually, law enforcement took action. After the garage attack, investigators obtained a warrant and arrested Michelle. Her devices, including her phone, laptop, and iPad, were seized for examination. Although her family posted bail and secured her release, the harassment continued. Angela received more threatening messages, and strangers kept showing up at her house. From the beginning, Michelle denied any involvement. When she was first informed about the restraining order, she expressed confusion, insisting she had never spoken to Angela and had nothing to do with the threats, emails, or Craigslist ads. Michelle claimed she was being impersonated and even revealed that she had received unusual messages herself. However, investigators dismissed her claims, convinced that she was the perpetrator. Then, another incident occurred. A 17-year-old boy showed up at Angela's house after responding to an online ad. Fortunately, Angela saw him before anything could happen and immediately called the police. The boy explained he thought he was answering an invitation similar to the earlier posts and had no idea the person in the photos wasn't the one who created them. The next day, on July 14th, Michelle was arrested again. This time, the case was treated with much greater urgency. Prosecutors described her as a threat to public safety, and her bail was set at $1 million. The charges against her were severe. Not only had Angela endured repeated threats and attacks, but her pregnancy with twins made the situation even more dire. Michelle's family was devastated. They believed in her innocence but didn't have the financial means to continue paying for her release. Michelle chose to remain in custody, putting her remaining resources toward her legal defense. Due to the seriousness of the case, Michelle was held in a high-security unit under strict monitoring. While she had not physically harmed Angela, authorities were convinced she had orchestrated the attacks, making her a dangerous individual. The weeks that followed were brutal. Inside jail, Michelle was treated with suspicion and contempt. Other inmates saw her as a snitch or an informant. She was targeted, harassed, and routinely assigned the worst jobs, scrubbing toilets, cleaning filthy corners, and enduring verbal abuse from both inmates and staff. The harsh environment was a far cry from the structured academic life she had always known. Michelle had grown up in Ontario, California, raised in a conservative household. Her parents owned a small business and instilled in her traditional values. She wasn't drawn to parties or attention. Instead, she found comfort in books and quiet places. Her passion was medieval history, and she eventually earned a degree in the field, devoting herself to studying the intricacies of the Middle Ages. At 22, she married her high school sweetheart, but the relationship didn't last. By the time she turned 26, they had divorced. It was after that, in 2011, that Michelle met Ian Diaz, 6 years her senior. The two connected on a dating website, exchanged a few messages, and eventually met for coffee. Ian was charming, well-spoken, and quickly became enamored with Michelle. His friends would later describe her as the ideal partner, brilliant, beautiful, and grounded. Ian told everyone she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Their relationship progressed quickly. In late 2014, Ian proposed during a trip to New York. They began planning a wedding for February 2016. In the meantime, they adopted a dog and began looking for a place to live. Eventually, they settled on a unit in a brand new complex in Anaheim's Southern District. The apartment cost just under $469,000. Michelle paid a $14,000 down payment, and together they applied for a loan to cover the rest. From the outside, their life looked idyllic. But behind closed doors, the cracks were already forming. Ian slowly began to assert control. At first, it was subtle. Michelle worked in the marketing department of a large insurance company, but Ian insisted the job was too stressful. He persuaded her to leave, offering instead to help her land a position as a project manager at Disneyland, where he had connections. He began encouraging Michelle to change her appearance, more makeup, tighter clothes, longer nails. He wanted her to get a belly button piercing. He bought her a new phone, tablet, and laptop under the pretense of generosity. Though Michelle later suspected he used them to track her, he called constantly, demanded updates on her whereabouts, and interrupted her sleep regularly with demands for attention. When Michelle decided to pursue a Master of Business Administration, Ian was unhappy and insisted on studying with her. When he was unable to do so, he began to make things difficult for her, leading to arguments, delays, and even disruptions to her study schedule. As time passed, Ian's expectations became more disturbing. He forces Michelle to engage in intimate acts that she finds extremely uncomfortable, specifically being with another man while he watches. Michelle refused. She made it clear she wouldn't tolerate those demands. She warned Ian that if he continued pressuring her, the relationship would not survive. But Ian dismissed her concerns, claiming she was exaggerating. At work, she regularly received explicit messages from him, including links to adult videos, often while she was in meetings or working. Then came Valentine's Day 2014. Michelle was sick that evening, battling a cold and taking medication. Ian began pressuring her again, insisting she fulfill one of his fantasies. Drained and desperate to end the conversation, Michelle gave in. What followed left a lasting scar. Ian posted an ad on Craigslist inviting a stranger to their home. He mixed Michelle 3 strong drinks despite knowing she was unwell and medicated. Then, as the stranger arrived, Ian set up a hidden camera and retreated to the bathroom, watching from behind a closed door. The next morning, Michelle was devastated. She told Ian that she felt used, violated, and ashamed. She begged him to delete the footage. Ian, unmoved, insisted that everything had been consensual. Their relationship spiraled from there. After one heated argument, Ian pulled the car over in the middle of a busy road and forced Michelle to get out because she hadn't, in his words, shown him respect. They tried therapy, but it failed after one session. When Michelle brought up the traumatic Valentine's incident, Ian exploded. He became so enraged that he drove recklessly around the city, refusing to let her out of the vehicle. He threatened to crash the car and kill them both. Michelle was trapped in a relationship that looked safe from the outside, but was deeply toxic, invasive, and emotionally abusive from within. By August 2015, Michelle had reached her breaking point. The constant pressure, fear, and manipulation from Ian had become unbearable, and she decided to leave. He responded with brutal revenge. He destroyed her belongings, canceled her car insurance, and sent threatening messages that his friends might come to her work, school, or home. Despite the threats, Michelle tried to start over. She found a new job, re-enrolled in school, and tried to rebuild her life. One unresolved issue was the apartment they had purchased together. Both their names were on the mortgage, and a legal resolution was required. In November 2015, they reached an agreement. Ian would pay Michelle $3,000 and assume full responsibility for the mortgage by June 5, 2016. If he failed to meet these terms, the apartment would be sold, and the proceeds split. However, none of this was disclosed to the Anaheim Police Department, not to the detectives, prosecutors, or officers handling the harassment investigation. Michelle was later jailed for more than 2.5 months. Frustrated and desperate for answers, her family began reviewing the evidence themselves. They discovered troubling inconsistencies in the timeline. Emails attributed to Michelle had been sent while she was either in class or hospitalized. The timestamps didn't align with her whereabouts. Then, the story took a shocking twist. Ian, the same man whose testimony had helped build the case against Michelle, came forward with a confession. Ian told police he now believed Michelle was innocent and that his current wife, Angela Diaz, had orchestrated the entire scheme. He admitted that one of the threatening emails tied to Michelle was sent from an account he had created. While he claimed he hadn't sent the message himself, he suspected Angela had used the account without his knowledge. Ian also revealed that Angela had lied to him about being pregnant. The ultrasound images she had shown him were fake, purchased on Etsy, where such items can be customized. Angela's deceit didn't end there. She had also falsely claimed to be a licensed attorney and a law school graduate, neither of which was true. More disturbing details about her past began to surface. Angela's ex-boyfriend Jason, a police officer, had been tricked into believing she had cervical cancer. Angela moved in with Jason and his son, even shaving her head and taking pictures at clinics to fake her lies. Yet, she showed none of the physical symptoms of chemotherapy. She drank wine, maintained her weight, and continued her normal lifestyle. Jason eventually grew suspicious. A friend followed Angela on a day she claimed to have a doctor's appointment, only to discover she never left the house. Jason reverse-searched one of the photos she had sent him and found it was taken from the internet. When confronted, Angela refused to provide medical documentation or show a port catheter, which is typical for cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy. It was then that the truth unraveled. Angela did not have cancer. Jason ended the relationship. Back in Anaheim, authorities executed a search warrant and seized Angela's phone and laptop. The evidence they uncovered was damning. On January 6, 2017, Angela was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, forgery, perjury, theft, and filing false police reports. The case against Michelle collapsed completely, as Angela used a VPN to send threatening emails and impersonated Michelle multiple times to cover her tracks. While the police investigated, the damage was already done. The alleged garage attack, a key aspect of Angela's claims, never happened. Home surveillance footage showed no intruder on the night in question. It appeared Angela had injured herself to fabricate the story, but the police failed to review the footage during their initial investigation. Throughout the investigation, Angela maintained her innocence, even smiling during the process. Eventually, she accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt and receiving a 5-year prison sentence, a surprisingly lenient punishment considering Michelle had nearly faced life imprisonment. Angela is now free and has since divorced Ian. Michelle was fully exonerated only after Angela's conviction. Even then, the moment felt bittersweet. The district attorney's office delayed issuing a public acknowledgement, forcing Michelle to demand that they disclose the truth or risk exposure. A press conference was eventually held, during which officials admitted to the miscarriage of justice, praised the investigation, and officially classified Michelle as the victim of a calculated scheme. From the very beginning, Michelle had been cooperative, repeatedly warning authorities that someone was impersonating her. She made daily calls to the police, urging them to trace the IP addresses behind the emails, but her pleas were ignored. She also flagged fraudulent Craigslist ads that Angela had posted and begged for their removal, only to be met with persistent failures by the system. Even after Angela confessed, Michelle remained convinced that Ian had played a role. Michelle's arrest coincided suspiciously with the same week Ian failed to meet court requirements to take over the apartment mortgage. Investigators eventually linked many of the threatening emails and Craigslist ads to IP addresses from Ian and Angela's home. Not only had Angela used the home network, but Ian had as well. Ian sent some of the incriminating messages using his work phone, personal phone, and laptop. Once their plan unraveled, Ian attempted to shift the blame entirely onto Angela. He changed his phone number, deleted email accounts, and tried to portray himself as a whistleblower. However, these actions failed to clear his name. Ian Diaz was ultimately charged with cyberstalking, conspiracy, perjury, and obstruction of justice. In 2023, he was sentenced to 10 years and 1 month in federal prison. In 2018, Michelle filed a federal lawsuit against Ian, Angela, the city of Anaheim, and the Anaheim Police Department, accusing them of false imprisonment and civil rights violations. By 2021, the lawsuit was settled for undisclosed terms. Today, Michelle has rebuilt her life. She completed a master's degree in business administration, began her career in the marketing industry, started her own business, and moved to New York, leaving behind her past in California. Recently, she welcomed her first child, a daughter. It was just another Friday afternoon in Recoleta, one of the nicest neighborhoods in Buenos Aires. Magali Yael Levy had dropped off her kids at school, as she always did, and returned home. A woman was scheduled to arrive around noon to help with the housework, but shortly after that woman walked through the door, everything changed. Later that day, police found Magali's apartment in complete disarray, things were thrown around, and some valuables were missing. But what they found in a bedroom was worse than anyone could have imagined. Magali, just 28 years old, was dead. At first, it looked like a robbery gone wrong, but the truth ran much deeper. This is the story of Magali Yael Levy, a young mother, a teacher, and a trusted neighbor whose final moments raised questions that still haven't been fully answered. Magali was born in 1977 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She was raised in a middle-class Jewish family where she learned about tradition, community, and order. Her parents, Ileana Emilia Cheo and Adrian Leon Levy, taught her the importance of faith and discipline, which would influence her life as a young adult. From an early age, Magali was known for her dedication to education and an innate desire to help others. She attended a renowned bilingual Jewish school located there. She not only absorbed knowledge but also developed a deep respect for Jewish teachings and heritage. After high school, she went to university to study labor relations. This field appealed to her because she was empathetic and interested in social dynamics. During her studies, she realized she wanted to be a teacher. After graduating, she returned to her old high school, but this time as a teacher, not a student. Magali was a well-loved teacher and colleague because of her calm nature, friendly personality, and approachable attitude. She was the type of teacher students would remember fondly for years after being in her class, a teacher who truly listened, paid attention, and cared about them. Magali followed her Jewish faith and married Alberto Yoel Arazzi, who shared her beliefs. They created a home in Recoleta, a wealthy and beautiful area of Buenos Aires. Their 2 children filled their home with joy, and they seemed to have a wonderful life. At 28, Magali had what many people wanted: a devoted husband, happy children, and a supportive community. Although Magali seemed calm, she was struggling. Being a mother, a teacher, and managing a home was exhausting her. As her responsibilities increased, she realized she needed help. In early 2005, Magali started looking for a reliable housekeeper to assist her during the week and bring some order back to her life. One of Magali's friends received a message from someone who said they knew a young woman seeking domestic work. She wanted to assist Magali, so she gave Magali the young woman's contact information. At the time, Magali didn't realize that the kind referral she received was actually a deliberate part of a sinister plot. Magali contacted the woman by phone. They spoke briefly and arranged a meeting for Wednesday, March 5th, at Magali's apartment in Recoleta. Unbeknownst to Magali, opening her door that morning wasn't an act of welcoming help, it was walking directly into a trap. Magali scheduled a trial day for the new maid, who calls herself Emilsa, to assess her skills and reliability. This was a preliminary step, seemingly routine. Security cameras at Magali's apartment complex recorded Emilsa's arrival at the gate. She called Magali to request access. Magali then came down from the building, greeted Emilsa warmly, and led her through the courtyard to her second-floor apartment. The day seemed normal at first. Emilsa completed her tasks and left on time. However, Magali felt uneasy. People close to Magali later said she wasn't completely happy with Emilsa. Magali wanted to find someone better, so she arranged an interview with another person. But that person didn't come. Because Magali was busy and needed help quickly, she contacted Emilsa again. She urgently needed assistance and asked Emilsa to come back on Friday, March 7th. That morning started as usual. Magali woke up before sunrise to get her children ready for school. Her husband, Alberto, left for work soon after, he dropping the kids off on the way. Magali went back home to wait for Emilsa, who was scheduled to arrive around noon. Emilsa would clean the house, and later, Magali would pick up the children for lunch. Around noon, the same woman showed up on the security cameras again at the complex. This time, the entrance gate was unlocked. She walked right in and went upstairs without notifying anyone. About an hour later, a young man arrived and waited near the entrance. When an elderly woman entered with her dog, he followed her closely, pretending to live there. That afternoon, something strange happened. Alberto received a call from his children's school. Magali, his wife, hadn't picked them up. This was very unusual because she was always on time. Alberto tried calling and texting Magali, but she didn't answer. He then called her parents, but they hadn't heard from her either. No one knew where Magali was. Increasingly worried, Alberto left work. He asked Magali's parents to get the children from school and rushed home to their apartment. As soon as he opened the door, he sensed something awful had happened. The apartment was a disaster. Furniture was knocked over, drawers were open and empty, and their belongings were strewn all over the place. But the disarray wasn't the worst of it. Inside their home, he found Magali's lifeless body. Her wrists and ankles were tied, tape covered her mouth, and a plastic bag was pulled over her head. She was cold and motionless. Shaking, Alberto called 911. Help arrived swiftly. Local police and paramedics were on the scene within minutes. Magali was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, investigators thought it was a home invasion that had gone wrong. There was evidence of forced entry and theft. Her cell phone and a small wall safe were missing, suggesting the burglars were unable to open it at the apartment and took it with them. Magali's condition revealed a disturbing story that went beyond simple robbery. Detectives believed her attackers subjected her to severe mental and physical torture, attempting to extract the safe's combination. Despite the intense pressure, she refused to cooperate. Her body was immediately transported to the city morgue for a full forensic examination. While police remained at the apartment collecting every trace of evidence, they dusted for fingerprints, photographed every room, and carefully sealed items for analysis, hoping something would help identify those responsible. The preliminary autopsy report was chilling. Magali had been assaulted and then killed using a dual method of suffocation. First, a plastic bag had been placed over her head. Then, a second mechanism, possibly manual pressure, had ensured she couldn't breathe. Her wrists and ankles had been tied. There were bruises on her body. Defensive wounds indicated she fought back until the very end. On the night of March 8, the day after the attack, Magali's family and friends gathered to mourn her. They held a funeral service and a traditional Jewish ceremony to say goodbye. The community was shocked and united in grief. While her loved ones mourned, the media covered the story extensively, with news outlets across Argentina reporting on it. Initial headlines described the murder as a violent robbery. However, some reports focused on Magali's religion, suggesting, without proof, that it might have been a hate crime. Amid the investigation into the controversial case, law enforcement struggled to piece together Magali's last movements. They needed to determine who she spoke with that morning, who visited her home, and, most importantly, the true reason for her murder. Authorities classified the case as a homicide related to a robbery. Investigators moved swiftly, interviewing neighbors, family members, and friends. Every angle was considered. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex and nearby streets became key. What they uncovered confirmed their worst fears. The only strangers seen entering the building that day were the woman who had presented herself as a housekeeper and a young man who slipped in behind another resident. Both were caught on external cameras leaving the building around 1:30 p.m., just after Magali was murdered. Each was carrying a bag. Authorities believed those bags held the stolen safe and other valuables from the apartment. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was a coordinated operation. The woman and her male accomplice were identified as members of a violent criminal gang. Police believe that once inside, the woman subdued Magali and then allowed her partner to enter. Together, they attempted to extract the safe's code through intimidation and force. When Magali refused, they killed her. Investigators suspect that more than 2 people were involved in planning and carrying out the attack. To find them, they reviewed a large amount of security camera footage and compared it with information from Magali's social media and online activity. A key piece of information came from the beginning, a 29-year-old woman named Elcira Jimenez Gonzalez. Police say she suggested the supposed housekeeper to Magali's friend. This connection seems to have started the chain of events. Elcira reportedly did more than just provide a name. She is suspected of arranging the way the attackers gained access to Magali's life. The woman who had infiltrated Magali's house under the false name Emilsa was identified as Diana, just 26 years old. Her mission had been precise and chilling: to survey the apartment under the guise of domestic help and take mental note of valuables. During that first visit, she located the safe, the centerpiece of what was about to become a brutal, fatal heist. Diana was not acting alone. Among the list of suspects was Sixto Fabian Araújo Amarilla, 30, Elcira's husband. He was already known to police, reportedly tied to the drug trade in one of Buenos Aires' most dangerous and crime-ridden neighborhoods. It turned out that Sixto and Elcira rented an apartment just 10 blocks away from Magali's home in Recoleta. That address would soon be revealed as a criminal hideout. The man who had entered Magali's building alongside Diana on the day of the murder was soon identified as Iván Jiménez González, just 20 years old and Elcira's younger brother. He was soon named the main suspect, believed to be the individual who physically carried out the killing. To track the suspect's movements before, during, and after the crime, investigators used various intelligence methods. These included geolocation tracking, mobile antenna triangulation, and analysis of call logs and messaging histories for everyone involved. Security footage from a local store showed Diana buying ropes, adhesive tape, and other materials believed to be used to restrain and gag Magali days before the murder. More disturbingly, she also purchased candles, suggesting a ritualistic element to the crime that investigators hadn't anticipated. According to police findings, after murdering Magali, the suspects regrouped at their hideout and broke open the stolen safe. Inside, they found approximately $6,000 in cash and several valuable items, which they divided among themselves. They then immediately fled Argentina, heading for Paraguay. Argentine authorities promptly issued international arrest warrants and, with the help of Interpol, launched a cross-border manhunt. Reports later revealed that once in Paraguay, the suspects sought refuge in San Pedro del Parana, a remote area known for its isolation and local superstitions. On Thursday, April 3, 2025, a breakthrough finally came. In a coordinated raid, officers stormed San Pedro del Parana and arrested Iván Jiménez González, the man accused of murdering Magali. The arrest marked a major turning point in the case. In another raid at a separate family member's home, investigators found a sports bag, shoes, documents, and several items suspected to have belonged to Magali. Following his arrest, Devon was placed in preventive detention under the authority of a national criminal court, awaiting extradition to Argentina. International arrest warrants remained active for the rest of the group. As Iván sat in custody, facing extradition to Argentina, his words began to unravel the full scope of the crime. In a confession reportedly given to Paraguayan police, Iván revealed the dark mechanics of the criminal ring he and his sister belonged to. Alongside Elcira and Diana, they had formed a team that specialized in residential burglaries across Buenos Aires. Their method was disturbingly calculated. Diana would pose as a domestic worker, gain the trust of homeowners, and when the time was right, allow her accomplices inside to rob the place. But something went terribly wrong in the apartment of Magali. Their target had been the safe, believing it held a large sum of cash. When Magali refused to give up the code, the situation escalated. After the crime, they transported the stolen safe to their hideout apartment, where they cracked it open using a grinder. Inside, they found around $6,000 in cash, along with valuables, spoils they divided before fleeing Argentina. While Iván now sat in custody, 3 others remained at large: Diana, Elcira, and Sixto. Investigators made progress by tracking a SIM card change to an isolated area near San Pedro del Parana. Information indicated that Elcira and Sixto were hiding in a region controlled by banned substance traffickers. The manhunt remained active. International alerts remained in place. The case, still under the jurisdiction of Argentina's National Criminal and Correctional Prosecutor's Office, continued to advance with support from Paraguayan law enforcement. The investigators also looked into whether this criminal group committed other similar robberies in Buenos Aires. These robberies involved the theft of cash, jewelry, and electronics. In most of these cases, the victims survived. However, The robbery of Magali was different and tragic. She was only 28 years old, a mother, wife, and teacher with a future. She had trusted someone enough to let them into her home, and this trust cost her her life. Her murder added to the growing statistics of violent deaths of women in Buenos Aires during the early months of 2025. According to reports from the Specialized Prosecutorial Unit on Gender-Based Violence, 17 similar homicides have been registered in 2024 alone. Magali's name became another line on a tragic list, but her case stood out for its cruelty, its orchestration, and its breach of domestic safety. Brisbane, Australia, is a vibrant city with a population of over 2.5 million residents. It is home to the Brisbane River, numerous parks, iconic landmarks, and stunning beaches. The city frequently hosts social events and festivals that draw visitors from around the globe. However, for the locals, Brisbane is primarily known as a hub for higher education, with several prestigious institutions scattered across the city. These include the Queensland University of Technology, the University of Queensland, and Griffith University, where, in March 2014, 21-year-old Sophie Collenbet was a student. Sophie, from Saint Julien, a small town in France, is ambitious and dedicated to her studies and career goals. In France, she had attended the University of Savoy-Mont Blanc, where she pursued her interest in languages and international business. Proficient in both German and English, Sophie excelled academically. After 2 years of study, she was accepted into an exchange program and received a student visa in February 2013. Fueled by enthusiasm and determination, Sophie left France shortly thereafter to begin her studies at Griffith University in Brisbane, where she majored in economics and business. She came from a loving and moderately affluent family, with 2 brothers, Lionel and Guillaume. She deeply missed her family after moving away, as they shared a close bond. She also broke up with her boyfriend, but the two still keep in touch from a distance and believe this temporary sacrifice is worth it for her to focus on her studies and build her future. Sophie dreamed of completing her studies, starting a family with her boyfriend, and eventually running her own business. In Brisbane, she formed close friendships with her classmates, and her boyfriend frequently visited her from France. With her parents' support, Sophie was able to manage her finances. She worked part-time as a waitress during weekends and occasionally tutored French to supplement her income. Thanks to her careful budgeting, she was able to rent a small apartment on the outskirts of Brisbane and even save money for a visit to France during the upcoming summer holidays in June 2014. She had last seen her loved ones during the New Year holidays and was eager to reunite with them. On Thursday, March 27, 2014, Sophie had evening lectures scheduled at Griffith University from 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. She attended class with a friend and used her tablet to take notes. After the lecture, they left the campus around 9 p.m. and walked to a nearby bus stop while chatting about their weekend plans. Sophie boarded the bus with her friend, but after a few stops, they parted ways, leaving Sophie to continue her journey alone. Later that evening, surveillance cameras captured Sophie as she got off the bus at her stop. The weather was stormy, with strong winds and rain, so she carried an umbrella. Since the bus route did not directly reach her destination, she decided to walk a few stops to save time rather than wait for another bus. At around 9:30 p.m., another camera recorded her walking past the Queensland Art Gallery. She then crossed a bridge over the Brisbane River and arrived near the entrance of a local park. To get to her rented apartment, Sophie needed to pass through the park, which appeared dark and empty at that hour. Her apartment was only 10 to 15 minutes away. Tragically, since Sophie lived alone, no one noticed that she never left the park or arrived home. Early on the morning of March 28, 2014, pedestrians and joggers in the park noticed a young woman lying on a bench, covered with a jacket and newspapers. Assuming she was a homeless person seeking shelter from the rain and asleep, they paid little attention. It was not unusual for homeless individuals to spend the night in the park. More than an hour later, one pedestrian who had seen her earlier passed by again. He noticed the woman hadn't moved and approached to check on her. When she failed to respond to his questions, he gently touched her shoulder. Receiving no reaction, he pulled aside the jacket and recoiled in shock. Beneath it was a completely naked and severely injured young woman. The man searched for a pulse but found none. Crying out for help, he attempted to administer CPR. Other bystanders rushed to the scene and called the police. Within minutes, emergency responders and law enforcement arrived, but it was already too late. The young woman had passed away. The victim was naked and had no belongings, identification, or bag, complicating efforts to immediately identify her. Strangely, she still wore rings and a necklace, ruling out robbery as a motive. The jewelry was photographed as evidence, and her body was transported for forensic examination. A few hours later, authorities identified her as Sophie Colombet, a 21-year-old university student. Detectives immediately began reconstructing the events of the previous evening. They discovered that Sophie had attended university lectures that evening and later rode the bus with a friend. Surveillance footage helped trace her movements until she entered the park. Around 10 p.m., she crossed a bridge and reached the park's entrance, where the assault likely began. Detectives believed she either didn't have time to react or was incapacitated and dragged to the bench where her body was later found. On that bench, she was savagely attacked, sustaining severe injuries. Large bruises covered her arms and under her eyes, suggesting attempts at self-defense. The bruises along her spine suggested she had been kicked, while her most critical injuries, a fractured skull caused by a blunt object, were fatal. The medical examiner concluded that Sophie did not die immediately. After the attack, the perpetrator left her to die on the bench, covering her body with a jacket and newspapers. Evidence of abuse was discovered during the autopsy, and the DNA of the perpetrator was recovered. Traces of the attacker's skin were also found under Sophie's broken nails, indicating she had fought back fiercely. Heartbreakingly, it is believed that Sophie was alive throughout the night. Even when the first park visitors noticed her, there was still a chance to save her life. She was, however, too gravely injured to call for help and passed away at dawn, an hour before police and paramedics arrived. The brutality of Sophie's murder outraged the public, especially because some park visitors might have saved her had they shown more concern. When police interviewed the witnesses who initially saw her, they consistently stated they assumed she was a homeless person sleeping and observed no movement or cries for help. This tragic indifference ignited heated debates about societal apathy and the lack of compassion for one another. Meanwhile, the detectives were assigned the task of uncovering what had happened in the park and identifying who had attacked Sophie. They found that Sophie's handbag or any other personal belongings were not found near the body. However, in the surveillance footage, she was seen entering the park with all her belongings. This pointed to two possibilities: either her belongings were left behind in the park, or the attacker had taken them. Despite conducting an extensive search of the park in the initial days, the police were unable to locate any of Sophie's items. Detectives concluded that the attacker likely took the items to mislead the investigation. Her bag contained valuable possessions, including a wallet, important documents, a mobile phone, and a tablet she used for her university work, items that could potentially be sold. The police visited local pawn shops in hopes of recovering the stolen items, but their efforts yielded no results. They also interviewed Sophie's friends and close acquaintances to identify anyone who might have harbored ill intentions toward her. However, her friends were confident that she wouldn't associate with anyone suspicious. Sophie was a reserved individual, especially around men, and if approached, she often mentioned having a fiancé and an upcoming wedding. She had no history of obsessive stalkers. Based on this information, detectives theorized that the attacker was likely a stranger who had targeted her at random. The investigation explored several possible scenarios. One theory suggested that the attacker had lain in wait for a random victim and struck as soon as Sophie entered the park. Another theory speculated that Sophie had been stalked, and the attacker had followed her after spotting her at a bus stop or on public transport. However, a detailed review of CCTV footage revealed that Sophie had been walking alone the entire time, with no men noticeably following her. This ruled out stalking, leading detectives to lean toward the first scenario. Finding the murder weapon became a top priority, and officers continued to comb the park. Once Sophie had been identified, her family in France was notified and immediately traveled to Australia to support the investigation and seek answers. Disturbingly, Sophie wasn't the first young woman to die in this park. Over the past 4 months, 3 other women under the age of 30 had been murdered under similar circumstances. However, each of these crimes had different perpetrators, all of whom had been swiftly caught and arrested. The perpetrators were individuals from marginalized backgrounds. Despite these resolutions, fear gripped the local community. Residents blamed law enforcement for failing to ensure their safety and demanded stronger protective measures to curb the wave of violent crime. This public outcry and direct confrontations with the officers working on Sophie's case only served to hinder progress. Over 70 officers were involved in the investigation, along with forensic experts searching for clothing, footwear, personal belongings, or the murder weapon connected to Sophie's case. The absence of cameras inside the park posed a significant challenge, though surrounding areas were equipped with ample CCTV coverage. Some detectives meticulously reviewed hours of footage in the hopes of identifying the attacker. Attention also shifted to a nearby shelter that provided temporary housing and support for homeless individuals. This facility became especially crowded during bad weather, making it a key focus for the investigation. Police initially checked the shelter after Sophie's body had been found, as they hadn't yet identified her and considered the possibility that she had spent the night there. However, no one at the shelter recognized Sophie. Later, detectives speculated that the attacker could have been a resident at the facility. It is worth noting that staff at the shelter were reluctant to cooperate fully with the investigation, but they did provide some useful information. The facility housed individuals recently released from prison and enforced strict curfews and reporting policies. Staff members noted that on the night of March 27th to 28th, one resident had returned much later than usual, raising further suspicion. The man had been behaving oddly and was not wearing the jacket he had earlier left with. Shortly afterward, he left the shelter and has not been seen since, despite having lived there for weeks and frequently stating that he had nowhere else to go. This individual was identified as 25-year-old Benjamin James Millward. CCTV footage from near the shelter captured a man resembling him leaving the building in the evening and heading toward the park. However, instead of entering the park, he walked around to another side, where his movements could no longer be tracked. A criminal background check revealed that Benjamin had been released from prison in December 2012, about a year and a half before Sophie's murder. He had previously served time for burglary and aggravated assault. After his release, he was placed on parole but repeatedly violated its conditions, leading to his rearrest a few months later. He remained in prison until July 2013. Several acquaintances described Benjamin as private and peculiar, though generally calm. Immediately after his release from prison, he struggled with severe substance abuse, excessive drinking, and periods of homelessness. During bad weather, he often sought refuge at a nearby temporary accommodation facility. This facility was located close to a park, which sparked public concern. Many argued that individuals who could pose a potential danger should not be allowed to reside so close to important public spaces. These concerns became widely debated on social media and in the news. The police obtained a photo of Benjamin as well as personal belongings he had left behind when he vacated his room at the shelter. Although he was the primary suspect in Sophie's attack, the authorities lacked definitive evidence linking him to the crime. To confirm his involvement, they needed to locate him, collect his fingerprints and DNA samples, and compare them with the evidence. Benjamin did not have a mobile phone or a bank card, and he had not been in contact with any family or friends since the murder. Fearing that he might have fled, detectives sought help from the public. They released photos and details of Benjamin, prompting a flood of tips to the police station. However, these initially led to dead ends. The police eventually identified his relatives, including his mother, Diane. Diane insisted that Benjamin could not have committed such a heinous act, as he had no history of violence. She explained that his prior run-ins with the law were motivated by financial gain, not malice. Several of his friends corroborated her claim, stating that Benjamin had never shown aggression toward women. Despite these assertions, investigators had no other suspects. Solid evidence was essential to confirm or refute Benjamin's involvement in the crime. News of Benjamin spread far beyond Brisbane, keeping the case in the public spotlight. 9 days after the murder, on April 7, 2014, motel owner in New South Wales, about 180 kilometers from Brisbane, contacted the police. The owner reported that a man resembling Benjamin was staying at the motel. The guest had paid in cash and had been staying for over a day. Initially, the owner had not recognized him, but after seeing a news report and Benjamin's photo, he alerted the authorities. The police acted swiftly, fearing Benjamin would flee again. Fortunately, when they arrived at the motel, Benjamin was still in his room and did not resist arrest. The officers did not disclose why he was being detained. During the drive back to Brisbane, he repeatedly mentioned that he had done something terrible but claimed he couldn't fully recall what had happened or with whom. He attributed his memory gaps to his heavy use of banned substances over the previous 2 weeks, which had left him with fragmented memories. Despite his confusion, he admitted that he had committed a serious wrongdoing. Upon arriving in Brisbane, the authorities placed Benjamin into custody. News of his arrest quickly spread, and the local community learned that he was the main suspect in Sophie's murder. Once it became known that Benjamin had been a resident at the shelter near the park, public outrage intensified, with many expressing anger over the proximity of the facility to such a critical public space. The 3 girls attacked before Sophie were also victims of individuals who were temporarily living in the area. Following the first attack, local residents strongly demanded improved security measures both around and inside the park. Some residents took extreme stances, even calling for the infamous nearby building to be demolished and for the shelter to be relocated outside the city. Unfortunately, no action was taken at the time, which ultimately led to the tragic deaths of 3 more girls. When the death toll reached 4, concerned Brisbane residents organized a vigil and protest. Participants carried candles and posters as they marched through the streets. Among the approximately 1,000 protesters were many students from Griffith University, including Sophie's friends. Some held signs reading "Safe Street for Sophie." The march crossed the bridge, passed through the park, and ended at the site where Sophie's body had been discovered. Along the way, numerous flowers were left in tribute. A temporary memorial was created near a nearby shop, displaying Sophie's name along with photographs of the other victims. The event drew widespread attention from the public, the media, and government authorities, sparking a renewed national debate on safety concerns in Brisbane and beyond. Meanwhile, Benjamin faced charges of armed robbery, abuse, and aggravated murder. While in custody, DNA samples were collected from him and matched 100% with biological evidence found during Sophie's autopsy and under her fingernails. Benjamin cooperated with investigators, revealing the locations of Sophie's mobile phone, tablet, and wallet. Despite claiming memory issues, he gradually began to recall the gruesome details of the crime during police interrogations. Benjamin explained that on the evening of March 27, he left his shelter to purchase an illegal substance and consumed large quantities of alcohol both before and after. On his way back, he noticed Sophie walking alone across the bridge toward the park. He followed her and attacked her shortly after she entered the park, insisting that he had not carried a weapon. Though police doubted his claim, he maintained that he had used no weapons during the attack. He admitted to brutally beating Sophie over an extended period, stomping on her body and head, which he attributed to the influence of a banned substance he had taken. Once Sophie was unconscious, Benjamin abused her, stole her belongings, and left her body on a bench, covering it with his jacket and some newspapers. He disposed of her clothes and handbag in the river and sold her valuables to buy more banned substances. Sophie's umbrella was later recovered from the water, but many of her belongings were never found. Despite the methodical nature of his actions, he claimed the murder was not premeditated. After the murder, Benjamin returned to the shelter, gathered his belongings, and fled a few hours later. Although he began to realize the gravity of his crime, he chose not to surrender to the authorities. Instead, he sold Sophie's valuables for money and traveled to New South Wales, where he was eventually apprehended. Benjamin avoided a trial by confessing to 2 charges. However, he continued to deny using a weapon and insisted that the crime was a spontaneous act of aggression driven by his altered state of mind caused by the use of banned substances. Before sentencing, Benjamin addressed Sophie's family, apologizing to everyone, including her fiancé. He also expressed gratitude to both the family and the police for their determination in apprehending him and bringing him to justice, something he admitted he would never have had the courage to do on his own. Unsurprisingly, Sophie's fiancé and family did not accept his apology. They were also dissatisfied with the court's decision. On October 25, 2016, Benjamin James Millward was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. Considering his age, there is a chance he could be released at a relatively young age, potentially posing a future threat. Sophie's family believed the sentence was far too lenient for such a dangerous individual and felt he should spend the rest of his life in isolation without the possibility of parole. It was a peaceful November afternoon in Stamford, Connecticut. Anna, age 32, was at home in her apartment, ending her day. Soon after, neighbors heard screams. When the police arrived, they found the door unlocked. Inside, they discovered a horrifying scene. Anna had been stabbed, and there was blood everywhere. However, there was no sign of forced entry, and nothing was stolen. The police had no immediate suspects. The question was, who would want to kill Anna, and why? The answer remained a mystery for years. When the truth finally came out, it was more shocking than anyone expected. Anna Lisa Raimundo was born in 1970 and grew up in New York City. Her parents, immigrants from the Philippines. Her father, a doctor, dedicated himself to his U.S. practice and providing medical care in impoverished countries. Together, her parents instilled the values of kindness, hard work, and purpose in their 3 children through their own actions, teachings. Anna, the middle child, stood out early on. She was intelligent, driven, and very compassionate, making a positive impact on those around her. Her hard work paid off in school. After graduating high school with honors, she gained admission to Harvard University, a top-ranked school. She thrived there and continued her education at Columbia University, solidifying her image as a promising young woman. Anna started her career soon after finishing school. She joined Purdue Pharma, a well-known pharmaceutical company. Purdue Pharma was located in Stamford, Connecticut, so Anna moved there for the job. This was a big step, but it paid off. Her job allowed her to be financially independent. By her early 20s, she had bought her own apartment. Everything in her life seemed to be going well. She had a good career, a home, and a promising future. Anna felt something was missing in her life until she met Nelson Sessler, a reserved and calm co-worker at Purdue Pharma, who was unlike her outgoing personality. Despite their contrasting personalities, they became friends, and their friendship developed into a romantic relationship. They kept their relationship private, particularly at work. Nelson spent increasing amounts of time at Anna's apartment, and her loved ones recognized that she was in love. She envisioned a future with Nelson and talked about getting married. In October 2002, they attended Anna's sister's wedding. At the reception, Anna caught the bridal bouquet, leading many to believe that she and Nelson would soon get married. However, just a few weeks later, their situation took a dark turn. On November 8th, Anna and Nelson were supposed to meet friends for dinner in Manhattan. The friends waited, expecting them to arrive, but they never did. As Anna didn't answer her phone, the friends left messages and assumed Anna were simply late or held up at work. But the continued silence soon suggested something much more serious. Earlier that day, a neighbor saw a man acting suspiciously enter Anna's apartment and called the police. When the police arrived, they knocked, but no one answered. Finding the door unlocked, they entered and discovered a gruesome scene. The apartment was wrecked, furniture was overturned, and belongings were scattered everywhere. In the hallway, Anna's dead body lay in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed multiple times, and the scene showed a violent struggle had taken place. She had clearly fought back. Even though the apartment was a mess, there was no sign of a break-in. The door wasn't forced, and nothing valuable was stolen. It didn't look like a robbery, it felt more like a personal attack. Detectives believe Anna probably knew her attacker and proactively let them in. There was no sign of a struggle at the entrance, the locks were untouched. The first lead came from the anonymous 911 call that had prompted the police response. The call had been made by a woman who described seeing a man entering Anna's apartment and fearing for Anna's safety. But before she could provide her name or any additional details, the call was suddenly cut off. Dispatchers attempted to redial the number, only to discover it originated from a pay phone located inside a restaurant not far from Anna's building. Police officers searched the area for clues, interviewing restaurant staff and customers, hoping someone had information. However, no one recalled seeing a woman making a phone call that day. The investigators were frustrated, as the anonymous tipster seemed impossible to find. Without caller ID, security footage, or anyone able to identify the caller's voice, her identity remained unknown. Having no other leads, the detectives focused on Anna's partner, Nelson Sessler, as is common in such investigations. Nelson discovered Anna's death upon returning home from work and finding police at her apartment. Reports indicated his reaction was unusually calm. He didn't appear shocked or upset, a lack of emotion that quickly made him a suspect. He was the last person known to have seen Anna alive, having spent the night with her and left in the morning, making him a primary focus of the investigation. Nelson seemed to have a solid alibi. Security camera footage showed him leaving Anna's apartment building early that morning. He was wearing the same clothes when he returned from work, and they were clean, with no signs of blood or injury. Despite evidence of a violent struggle at the crime scene, Nelson had no scratches or marks on him. Investigators found this odd, given how much Anna fought back. Furthermore, Nelson's co-workers confirmed he stayed at the office all day. No security footage or witness accounts placed him at the crime scene during the time the crime occurred. Even though the police still suspected Nelson, they couldn't find any solid evidence to connect him to the murder. They had no motive to explain why he would do it, and no forensic evidence placing him at the scene. They collected many blood samples, hoping to find DNA from the killer. However, all the samples only showed Anna's blood. The small amount of other DNA found didn't match anyone in the police databases. The investigation stalled. After 5 months of no leads, a break finally came on March 22, 2003. At a nearby hospital, Paul Christos was admitted for emergency surgery, suffering from 3 stab wounds to the chest. He was discovered in the hospital parking lot, wounded but still alive. Witnesses to the attack alerted hospital staff, who intervened quickly. Doctors stabilized Paul, and after regaining consciousness, he identified his attacker to investigators. According to Paul, his attacker was his wife, Sheila Davilo. Paul described what began as a seemingly innocent game meant to add excitement to their marriage. It was Sheila's idea. First, she put on a blindfold. Then, Paul touched her with different things from around the house, and she tried to guess what they were using only her sense of touch. After that, Paul took his turn. Paul, blindfolded and handcuffed, suddenly experiences severe pain in his chest. And he felt the pain again. Confused and in shock, he heard Sheila say she might have accidentally hit him. Bleeding and disoriented, Paul couldn't understand what was happening. His first thought was that Sheila had fallen, and he had been injured in the process. As the blood pooled and the pain worsened, it became obvious this was not an accident. Paul, injured and in need of medical help, asked Sheila to call an ambulance, despite her apparent fear of blood which, she said, caused her panic. He overheard her on the phone and assumed she was calling for emergency services. He waited, but after 30 minutes, no ambulance arrived. Realizing Sheila had not called for help, Paul told her to drive him to the hospital, which was only a few miles away. The situation worsened when Sheila couldn't find the key to unlock Paul's handcuffs. Since they were running out of time, they had to break the chair to free him. As they drove, Paul noticed Sheila was driving unusually slow and carefully. He pleaded with her to drive faster, but she refused. When they arrived at the hospital, Paul thought she would hurry him inside. Instead, she parked in a distant, isolated part of the parking lot, far from the entrance, and turned off the car. She got out without a word and went to the trunk. Paul assumed she was getting assistance or something to help him. However, she came back with a knife, not medical supplies. For the third time that day, Paul felt a knife stab him in the chest. Sheila tried to run away, leaving Paul trapped in the car. A witness saw this and called the police, who arrived quickly. Paul was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency open heart surgery for his severe wounds. He survived. Afterward, police investigated the scene and found Sheila's phone in the parking lot near the car. The phone revealed that Sheila had lied. She hadn't called for an ambulance, even though Paul thought he heard her do so. Instead, she had called someone named Nelson. Police traced the call and started investigating Nelson. Sheila called him immediately after attacking her husband. Detectives discovered that Nelson had previously been involved with Ana Lisa Raimundo. He was also a person of interest in Ana's unsolved murder, which occurred a few months prior. The investigation suggests that Sheila connects two seemingly unrelated violent crimes. Sheila Davilo was born in 1969. Raised with a strong emphasis on education, Sheila excelled academically. She followed her parents' path by studying biochemistry at New York University. Sheila's parents arranged her marriage, but it didn't last. While studying at NYU, she had an affair with her classmate, Paul Christos. Her husband found out, and they divorced. Sheila then married Paul in 2000. They both had successful careers and moved to Pleasantville, New York. Their life seemed perfect, but hidden problems existed. Why did she try to kill her husband? What was her relationship to Nelson and, more crucially, to Ana? Everything started to become clear when the police brought Nelson in for questioning. He was surprised to be called in and didn't understand how he was involved. However, once he arrived at the station and discovered that Sheila, he began to understand. At first, Nelson claimed he and Sheila were just friends and colleagues who kept in contact. However, as the detectives questioned him further, his story fell apart. Eventually, feeling pressured, Nelson confessed that he and Sheila had been having an affair. This changed the entire investigation. The affair began in the summer of 2001, when Sheila, unhappy in her marriage to Paul, she met Nelson at work. They quickly became lovers. Sheila's marriage to Paul was strained and loveless. They were simply living together. So Sheila found solace in Nelson. Then, he met Ana, whose intelligence and personality attracted him. For a while, he dated both women, unsure of who he wanted to be with. However, he fell more in love with Ana and decided to end things with Sheila by the end of 2001 to be with Ana. Sheila hid her pain. She pretended not to care about the breakup in front of Nelson, but she felt humiliated, angry, and jealous because Nelson had chosen Ana over her. After Ana's murder in November 2002, while others avoided Nelson, some suspecting he was involved in Ana's death, Sheila stayed by his side. They started a relationship again. During questioning, the detectives learned that on the day Sheila stabbed Paul, she called Nelson to arrange lunch, not to confess. She said the call was to tell him she had to cancel because Paul had been in an accident. Nelson didn't even know Sheila was married. She had told him she was divorced, and her home life seemed to confirm this. He had spent many weekends and nights at her house and never saw any evidence of another man. The detectives uncovered a shocking truth. Sheila had constructed a complex lie to maintain relationships with both men. She told Nelson that her disabled brother lived with her and was too emotionally fragile to know about her dating life. Whenever Nelson stayed over, Sheila made Paul leave the house completely, removing all his belongings and forcing him to sleep somewhere else. Sheila told a strange story during questioning. She insisted that Paul's stabbing was an accident that happened during a guessing game with household items. She said the last item was a knife that accidentally slipped from her hand. However, Investigators didn't believe her. Her weak excuses fell apart under questioning, and she was charged with attempted murder. As detectives investigated further, they became more and more sure that Sheila was also responsible for Anna's death. She had a motive. Nelson had left her for Anna, and the timing of Anna's death seemed too suspicious to be a coincidence. Paul inadvertently confirmed the detective's suspicions. During an interview, they mentioned Anna's name, and Paul immediately recognized it. Sheila had frequently told him about a fictional love triangle at work involving characters named Jack, Melissa, and Anna. It became clear that Jack represented Nelson, Melissa was Sheila herself, and Anna was the actual woman Sheila saw as a romantic rival. Sheila was obsessed with her rivals, not just discussing them. She asked Paul for advice on how to break in undetected. Thinking he was assisting his wife's friend, Paul offered suggestions and even loaned her his night vision scope, unknowingly helping Sheila stalk Anna. The investigators now understood the situation. They believed Sheila killed Anna because she was obsessed with Nelson and wanted to get rid of her rival. After Anna's death, Sheila saw an opportunity to be with Nelson. However, Paul, her husband, was still an obstacle. She couldn't be with Nelson freely while still married, and another divorce would embarrass her family. Sheila believed the only solution was to kill Paul. However, this was just a theory until solid evidence emerged. Investigators had collected many blood samples from Anna's apartment. One sample, a tiny droplet on the bathroom faucet, had been missed initially. This droplet was likely left when the killer washed up after the attack. DNA analysis confirmed the detective's suspicion: the blood belonged to Sheila Davilo. Around the time of the murder, Paul remembered Sheila having a deep cut on her hand. She said she got it from a dog food can, but it now seemed likely she was injured during Anna's struggle. The DNA match and analysis of the 911 call gave prosecutors what they needed. Although Sheila's family and friends couldn't confirm it was her voice on the call, voice analysis proved she made it. After killing Anna, she anonymously called the police, possibly out of guilt or to influence when the body was found. In 2004, Sheila Davilo was convicted of attempted murder and assault of Paul Christos. She was sentenced to a maximum of 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2007, 5 years after the Anna's murder, Sheila was charged. Confident in her innocence, she fired her lawyers and decided to represent herself. Her trial began in 2012, 10 years after the crime. Her ex-husband, Paul Christos, testified against her. Despite her attempts to influence the jury, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Sheila Davilo was convicted of Ana Lisa Raimundo's murder after a 2.5-week trial and sentenced to 50 years. After completing a 25-year sentence at Bedford Hills Prison for Women in New York, she will be transferred to a prison in Connecticut to begin serving a 50-year sentence. In total, she will be imprisoned for 75 years. Her case is a disturbing example of how deception, obsession, and manipulation can hide beneath an ordinary appearance. The Ana Lisa Raimundo case is a shocking tragedy that exposes the dangers of jealousy and obsession hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Sheila Davilo, driven by unrequited feelings for Nelson Sessler, murdered Anna and attempted to murder her husband, Paul Christos. Sheila's appeals in 2014 and 2015 failed, with the Connecticut Supreme Court confirming that Paul's testimony was not bound by the marital communication privilege. The case attracted significant media attention, with extensive coverage on shows such as Snapped and Betrayed, highlighting the dangers of toxic relationships. Anna's family, including her parents Renato and Susan and sister Bernadette, expressed relief that justice had been served. They established a medical scholarship fund in the Philippines in Anna's memory, turning their loss into a meaningful legacy. Anna's story is a warning about the fragility of trust and the consequences of deception. It reminds us that behind the most intimate relationships can lurk deadly intentions, leaving wounds that never heal for those left behind.